This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. You are, well, you know you are. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I hope you had a lovely weekend. Do you remember, I've become a sort of, a magnet for tales of young people and their excuses for not working. Keith stumbled across one this weekend. He brought it to me first thing this morning. A young woman who can't accept a job at the moment because her dog has separation issues, separation anxiety, no less. And you would have laughed at that. Well, perhaps you are laughing at that now. But the tale of the young woman who literally turned down a job offered to her by a friend of mine because her neighbours had just got a new cat and she might be required to look after it at short notice. I don't know. It's not fair to the younger generation. Of course it's not. But hey, if you can't laugh, what can you do? Just a little bit of banter, which is, of course, one of the defences offered up for the television presenter Gregg Wallace, who finds himself in the centre, I think it's fair to say, of a massive... You didn't see what I did there? Who noticed what I did there? Did you notice what I did there? It won't last. In fact, it probably won't even get to 10 past 10. But I consciously tried to stop myself from saying the word extraordinary because I've been saying it with such unerring frequency of late that it is completely losing all of its weight and impact. But Gregg Wallace, the presenter of MasterChef and various other programmes, is in a whole heap of trouble. A heap of trouble that he managed to make considerably worse over the course of the weekend by releasing a sort of defence, a self-filmed defence of himself against the allegations he is facing, which essentially, it did accuse middle-class women of a certain age of being embarked upon some sort of conspiracy against him. And of course, the certain age would, I think, be pretty much the same age as him. So I'm not quite sure what the relevance there is, but I do find issues like this fascinating because they speak to genuine confusion, don't they? And it's a confusion that I think many of us have suffered from over the years. There are things that would make my hair stand on end in 2024 that I'm fairly confident I would have been almost supremely untroubled by in 2020. Certainly when I was on a national newspaper, the quotes, banter, end quotes, was of a kind that my teenage daughters would find absolutely reprehensible. And I have found, and no one wants to get holier than thou on a morning like this, or at least I don't, but I have found that the best thing to do when you're in these circumstances is to ask other people, usually women, about where the boundaries are and why those boundaries are there. I'm blessed with having many, many women in my life who are capable of providing me with a little bit of guidance. So this morning, slightly tongue-in-cheek, I'll be honest, we were discussing a story about sex workers in Belgium being able to sign a formal employment contract and gain labour rights on a par with other professions, which would include maternity leave and other things. And so, you spend your life trying to be funny. You sort of might say something like, oh, what about paternity leave for the punter in that kind of context, which is not a very good joke, but it's not over the line of what Gregg Wallace stands accused of doing. So I asked Eleanor, the producer, why isn't it? And she said, quite rightly, because it doesn't make anyone feel uncomfortable. It's not specifically targeted at anyone. It's not, and it's not a particularly funny joke, but more importantly, it's not something that carries with it a heft, a weight, an impact that could trouble someone. And I remember the first time this message was brought home to me was live on the radio. And at the time, if you are a familiar listener, if you are a regular listener to the programme, you probably know the story I'm going to share now. But there's a reason why I come back to it again and again, because it so perfectly, for me, encapsulates that line between what you heard some of Nick's callers towards the end of the programme saying, which was, well, I don't see what the problem is. This is all absolutely fine. And the knowledge that it isn't, the knowledge that young women, all women, have sensitivities that society has historically ignored, worse than ignored, ridden roughshod over almost forever. I think age is relevant. I think the generational shifts mean that you would not put up now with things that your mother's generation had to put up with. One of the best examples I have, so if I haven't explained myself properly, and I'll tell you the story in a minute in case you don't remember it. One of the best examples I have, what you're looking for is a line that was once completely commonplace, right? But which, when you stop to think about it, was actually outrageous. Or at least obnoxious. So something that you would have not batted an eyelid at. Well, as a man, you see. Something that you as a man would not have batted an eyelid at in the 1970s. But also perhaps not even in the 1980s or the 1990s. But which, when you stop and think about it, you realise is beyond the pale. And what we're going to try and do in this hour is work out, for the people who need help, which may still include me, I hope not, but where the pale is. Where is this line between banter and obnoxiousness or employment issues, unacceptability? And so the line I often reach for at this point is one which I have heard men say, even while I have had this job. I've heard it said in this building. And it would involve a much older man saying to a much younger woman, gosh, if I was 20 years younger. Now, what's wrong with that? The room will divide at this point into people who can clearly see what is wrong with that and people who think there's nothing wrong with it at all. I'm not sure there's much of a grey area. And that's why this kind of issue is fascinating. So we often operate in the grey areas. But what if there aren't any? So you say that an older man in a work environment usually means he's in a position of seniority, a position of power, says to a younger woman, and remember, he thinks this is some sort of compliment. He certainly thinks this is banter. He says something like, oh, if I was 20 years younger. Now, he doesn't go into any detail. He doesn't need to write the second half of that sentence, although sometimes they will. But the point is this. He is thinking about that much younger woman, that much less powerful woman in the context of this kind of conversation, in an explicitly and obvious sexual way. He is imagining himself having sex with her on some level. And he doesn't realise how unpleasant an experience that will be for her. The other thing he is doing, which I think you probably could chalk up as blokish absurdity, is he's imagining that the woman would have been interested in him had he been 20 years younger, which is an act of such arrogant presumption that goodness only knows what the correct response is. So there is a wonderful example of something that some people, even now listening to this program, will think is completely innocuous, something that almost everybody of a certain age, to borrow Gregg Wallace's unfortunate language, will have heard somebody else say, or will have had directed at them, or will, God forbid, have actually said themselves, with, I think, a fair degree of defence allowed on the grounds that you'd never stop to think about how obnoxious it actually was. So there's the line. That man is thinking consciously about sexual relations with that woman, which is not something you should ever be airing in public. Certainly not with somebody in a junior position to you, or someone who perhaps relies upon your patronage for their livelihood. But the one that sticks with me and has stuck with me now for the best part of 20 years, because it came up quite early in this job, quite wet behind the ears, where I think I would have been a little bit closer to the I don't really understand what all the fuss is about school of thought. And it involves a woman who 20 or 30 years previously, that's crucial here, because she was in her 20s when this happened. She was in her 40s when she called me. A successful city lawyer, I mention that for context, I don't know whether it's relevant, who remembered an incident from her early years as an article clerk doing her training contract in a big solicitor's firm in London when she was required to come in on a Saturday. And she was in the lift with the partner. You're kind of twinned, if you like, with a partner. You're seconded to a partner when you're doing that kind of contract, and they have quite a lot of power over you. And he wasn't an obnoxious character. He wasn't, one of the people that would come back from lunch with uncontrollable behaviour or poor regulation. He was quite mild-mannered. He was quite modest in his behaviour, but they're in a lift alone. The two of them are in a lift on a Saturday. She's in home clothes, because when you come in on a Saturday, you can wear home clothes. And he said to her, quite a shy character ordinarily, he said to her, "I love the way you fill those jeans." He didn't say, "Those jeans are lovely," or even, "Those jeans look lovely on you," or "You look really nice today," or "I love those jeans. I like those jeans," or "Gosh, I've never seen you in casual clothes before. They really suit you." So lots of things you could have said, which may not have been welcome, but which I don't think, and this is why we're trying to work out where the line is, I don't think would have been inappropriate. Unwelcome and inappropriate are not the same thing. If you're not allowed to compliment anybody ever, then the species might come to an end. Or we'd have to all move to Gilead, because how on earth would you ever be able to establish contact with somebody who may actually welcome that contact? That used to be something else I'd go down as a road, because I met my wife at work. You're not allowed to chat anyone else up at work. You're not, how on ever would you ever have met anyone? But you know the difference between inappropriate and unwelcome. So it might be unwelcome, but it's not inappropriate. And that's where the line appears. That's where you move either beyond or before the pale. And as she explained it to me, and I needed it explaining. Let me be absolutely clear about that. There's no kind of po-faced pomposity. Well, there's loads, but not in this specific instance of the introduction. She explained it to me as it meant he was thinking about my bottom. He wasn't thinking about my jeans. He didn't say the jeans are nice. He said the way you fill those jeans, which means he's thinking about my body. He's thinking about my legs, my backside. And that makes me really uncomfortable, especially in a lift, in a closed lift, with a man who is older, more powerful, both physically and professionally than me, who is talking to me about my, in a sense, my naked body, because it's a naked body that fills jeans. And I don't know whether I need to be embarrassed about this. I don't think I'm ashamed. But the penny dropped for me there in a way that it hadn't previously. In that I understood why that comment was both unwelcome and inappropriate. Now, you could come back and say, well, what if she'd fancied him and she'd wanted to have an affair with him, or she'd wanted to have a relationship with him? Well, you could still have established contact by complimenting her on her clothes, but not on the way that she filled them. So in the years since, with a big upsurge during the Me Too movement, I've come to realise, despite being married to a very strong and independent woman, that most men don't know how often women wince inwardly, how often women are not actually laughing along, or they might be outwardly laughing along with something, but inwardly they are anything but encouraging or enjoying the moment. But that is what patriarchy means. Let me just find you a quick message to show you why words like patriarchy and indeed entire conversations like this are so Here's one. "I'm sick of all this woke Guardian reading nonsense," says Dave. And yet what have we done? We've just asked ourselves, how can we make the world a nicer place for the women that we love? So spare a thought for the women that Dave loves. How can we make the world a nicer place for all women, not just the women that we love, and therefore for men as well? Because that line, that pale, that issue on what you should be doing, I don't know that it's that hard to plot. But I think part of the reason that it's hard to plot, and for goodness sake, this is not victim blaming, this is just explaining, part of the reason that it's hard to plot for some men, and I speak as someone who kind of used to be one of them, or at least used to be a little bit confused by some of these issues, and is still confused by others. I'm 52. That's relevant to this conversation. I will have 22-year-old colleagues that find this sort of examination and exploration unnecessary and possibly even unhelpful. But I know that it's helpful for some of the people you heard talking to Nick towards the end of his programme today. At least I hope it is. Like Dave and his Guardian notwithstanding. And then you have this knowledge that, and this is where I'd say I'm categorically not victim blaming, that you fully understand why you wouldn't speak up. Imagine you were a woman on set with Gregg Wallace, and he said something that you found both inappropriate and unwelcome and outrageous and obnoxious. Something that in a different working environment would be an HR offence. But the power you exercise in these contexts is immense. topics I've decided not to do today include the one about why haven't men done more? Why have no male colleagues come forward yet? Or why have no male contestants come forward yet to endorse or enforce what has been done by their colleagues and by their fellow contestants? Because that, just for now at least, it's 10:18, that's too hypothetical, unless you're one of them and you want to give me a ring and tell me, in which case 0345 60973 is an interesting question which I can't answer, and such a tiny constituency of people can, that I'm not sure how helpful it would be to go down that road. But let's work on the principle that some people really don't know where the line is. And now let's tell them. 0345 6060 973 with, if you like, examples. Here is a quick clip of Gregg Wallace trying to make things better. I'll say that again. Trying to make things better over the course of this weekend.
Now, I've been doing MasterChef for 20 years. Amateur, celebrity and professional MasterChef. And I think in that time, I have worked with over 4,000 contestants of all different ages, all different backgrounds, all walks of life. And apparently now, I'm reading in the paper, there's been 13 complaints in that time. Now, in the newspaper, I can see the complaints coming from a handful of middle-class women of a certain age just from Celebrity MasterChef. This isn't right.
20 minutes after 10 is the time. I think there are other programmes involved, including Kirsty Allsop revealing that while they were filming a pilot, I think for a different programme entirely, he made a comment to her about a sex act that him and his partner had conducted that morning. So, again, that there is the line. That's not a personal threat or a personal intrusion, but it clearly crosses. You just wouldn't do it, would you? So where is the line? For people who don't know, for people who need help, what would you tell them? How would you explain it? How would you illustrate it? It's 20 minutes after 10. Phone lines are open. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 10:21.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 23 minutes after 10. I'll read you this one quickly, because I don't know. You know how naive I can be sometimes. Maybe people like this are beyond help, but I always like to think not. Why should Gregg Wallace shut his mouth, writes Paul? Is he not allowed to defend himself? Is he supposed to just sit there and take all this nonsense, this wokeness? That's the second time I've seen the word wokeness in the context of women not wanting men to talk about their private parts or sex or anything else of that ilk in front of them unbidden. This wokeness has gone too far. It's ruining perfectly good people's lives. I'm sure if true, it was all meant in banter. Carry On films had loads of innuendo in them. This madness has to stop. There are far more important things in life to worry about, like war, terrorism and real crime, at least two of which, Paul, we will be discussing later in the programme. But there are allegations of groping a camera assistant and going back 10 years. Sexual comments in a professional context, 13 women now having made allegations with regard to one show. So I don't know what your definition of banter is, but if you want to ring in and tell me, that would be helpful perhaps for both of us. Jen's in Attleborough in Norfolk. Jen, what made you pick up the phone?
Something that happened in the 90s, actually, James. I used to work in an oil company. Car park, when we used to be able to park our cars, was down in the basement area. And there was a service lift that took employees up to the offices. So one morning, they were very small service lifts. One morning, I squeezed myself into this lift with my husband, and I was the only female in the lift. I was closest to the door shut, and there must have been about 8 people altogether in the lift. And as we started to move up, this American voice from the back said, "Isn't this just your favourite fantasy?" And at that moment, I just felt as if all the people in the lift were imagining things in their heads that were completely inappropriate. And my husband was standing right next to me. We were squashed. Yeah. But he said, "Do you mind? That is my wife." But to this day, I regret not actually taking that further. And it was an American voice. So it was somebody from head office.
Right.
And I think the fear of that, and I was the manager for equal opportunities. That's the irony of all of this.
Oh, my days.
Yeah.
Did he say anything after your husband said that?
No, nothing. The lift just went, the lift was quiet anyway, but there was a really awkward silence then after that.
And if you had to explain why that was unacceptable to him, if he hadn't worked it out for himself, or perhaps unhelpfully, he'd thought, oh gosh, I do apologise, I didn't realise that your husband was here, or I didn't realise that she was your wife, which means he's not apologising for what he's done. He's apologising, a mealy-mouthed apology via some sort of social construct. What would you say if he needed your help understanding why that was out of order?
He diminished my role. He diminished me. It didn't matter what I was, what my role was in the company. He saw me as a sexual object in that minute.
And that is just banter, according to people like Paul.
No, the fact is, James, I still think about that.
I can tell from your voice. I can tell from your voice. And the fact that the story I shared earlier was set in a lift, no doubt brought it back even more.
Yes, it did.
And do you understand why I found that so shocking? Because I'd never thought of it from your point of view before. I'd never.
Yeah, I felt naked in the lift that day.
There it is. Yeah,
and I couldn't get out of the lift quickly enough. I was angry. I was upset. There was a range of emotions actually it triggered. But, and as I said, I just regret not taking that.
Well,
further.
Of course you do, but you mustn't beat yourself up. The point is that's why it happens, because our society, that's why the word patriarchy is so powerful. It is what happens in a world where you have to subsume your feelings. You have to bury your responses. You literally have to turn off your sensibilities, your feelings, your sensitivities, because to make a fuss would cause more trouble. Even for the head of equal opportunities.
I know. He didn't know who I was, clearly. But, I could have been... It doesn't matter what I did. But, the fact was he also obviously was shocked that my husband was beside me in the lift, because he just objectified me.
And that's the word. And again, these words that sometimes appear a little bit academic come to life when people like you ring into programs like this, Jen. Objectified. There it is. Thank you. Listen, I don't want to start mansplaining today of all days, but I don't want anyone to feel bad about having failed to, or having chosen not to. I don't even want to use the word failed. Chosen not to do something which, and I think this gets better with the passing years, but which would have brought all manner of trouble to your door. In the event of you filing an actual complaint. It's extraordinary. Something a bit odd is happening in the studio. I think I can I'm going to check with Eleanor during the break whether or not I can tell you, actually. This hasn't happened to me before in a conversation like this, but I just want to be 100% clear that it is something I can share. Jennifer is in Chiswick. Jennifer, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So I would like to say where the line is between being... say, having a sensible compliment or having it turn inappropriate it all depends on context. So if a woman is in a workplace and she is there because of her qualifications, her experience, and a man in that workplace starts to make the conversation entirely about her physical appearance, her automatic thoughts are just going to go to, I am simply just nothing more than my physical appearance to my colleague.
And that's her physical appearance. It's not even her wardrobe or her choice of shoes. It's her physical appearance. That's what we mean by objectified.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I would also like to add, there's a lot of men who would be listening to this program and not understand why this is an issue.
Yeah.
So I just want, if there's any men listening, I just want you to imagine that you have to go in your day-to-day life thinking constantly about who is around you, what am I wearing, can I go here because is someone going to say something in public? Just imagine if you went out and men started objectifying you. There's a lot of men who would balk at the idea of a gay man approaching them and start talking about their physical appearance. They would respond in anger, but yet they're confused when women respond in that way.
And I think it needs to be, to understand it better, if anybody's minded to try, that it needs to be coupled with that sense of constant threat, which is something else that a lot of men still don't understand, but which even men who like to think of themselves as being on the right side of these sort of issues didn't even begin to appreciate until the Me Too movement gathered pace and women started sharing stories about commonplace incidents. And I use the word commonplace cautiously because they shouldn't be commonplace, and perhaps lots of us didn't realise just how commonplace they were, because as with staying silent in that lift, you get so used to it that you don't call it out, when obviously if the boot was on the other foot and men were living in that constant condition, that's the point. So, I got a couple of messages saying, well, a woman said that to me at work once and I took it as a compliment. It's about context and constancy. It's about conditioning. It's about, we don't live in a matriarchy where women have all the power and exercise it by commenting in a way that make you, to go back to the last caller, that makes you feel naked. So that you can be unwelcome but not inappropriate, I think. Can you?
Yes, definitely. Like I said, it is all about context. But in this specific case about Gregg Wallace, I mean, there is just no way on earth that you can justify the type of quote-unquote jokes that he was making. They weren't jokes at all. In the context, it was completely inappropriate. And I'd just like to add one more thing.
Of course.
So any men or boys who are listening and project that anger onto women or girls who end up isolating themselves from men or feeling more afraid and less likely to engage with men, I'd like you to project your anger on the men who do make these inappropriate jokes or comments or have or commit violent acts against women and girls. It's them who are causing women and girls to withdraw.
What an excellent point. Yeah, what an excellent point. Thank you, Jennifer. 10:32 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:36 is the time. So the thing that's happened that I don't remember happening before is the number of messages I'm getting containing personal anecdotes involving the character that we're talking about. I'm not going to read any of them out in full because obviously there's no right of reply, and I don't know that it would be entirely fair, but there's just one line here which I thought was interesting. As I was leaving, he once again winked at me and said, "Hold on, you're not a journalist, are you?" I was dumbfounded at how out of order he was. I posted it on my Facebook without using his name, but mentioned a couple of elements of what I've just shared with you. And 4 women who worked in TV at the time all guessed who it was immediately. And that perhaps addresses one of the things I'm still slightly confused by, which is the scale of this story. Why Gregg Wallace and the alleged behaviour towards female colleagues and contestants on programmes that he presents is on the front page of every newspaper this morning except the Financial Times. So it's going to reflect 2 or 3 things. There'll be some BBC bashing in there because, there always is. There'll be something linked to the scale or the nature of his celebrity. And that the weird thing about celebrity is it can pass you by. You know, there are really famous people in the jungle at the moment I've never heard of, and I'm sure the same is true of you. But he's obviously a very big MasterChef, is part of the cultural furniture, isn't it? It's been a huge show for the longest time, and he pops up in lots of other places as well. But the third thing might be the volume and quantity of anecdote or experience or allegation, and the sense that finally the dam has broken, and that is what he's being washed away in, and that's why the media is jumping into this so I don't want to say enthusiastically, but at such volume, at such pace. I don't know. As I've said to you a million times in the past, I was the world's worst showbiz editor. And never is that truer than when there's a massive showbiz story around. 10:38 is the time. Terry is in Birmingham. Terry, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, so to answer your question, where the line is drawn,
yes.
I don't think there is a line. To be fair, we've got laws. So we've got the Equalities Act with its protected characteristics, which clearly defines what is racism, what is sexism, and all that sort of stuff. But everybody's line is in a different place. And that's what the problem is my line isn't in the same place that your line is.
But an employer has a responsibility to put the line in the same place for everybody, I think.
This is the really interesting point, isn't it? So I work for an organisation with 10,500 members of staff.
Right.
And if you imagine every single person has the line in a different place, when I clock in for work, though, my line aligns to what my organisation's line is. You're quite right. And that's where the problem is, because I'm always quite surprised at the amount of relationships that take place within a work environment.
Well, some work environments, again, age is going to be a big factor in where that line is, because some work environments have made that outlaw. Didn't someone senior have to resign recently because it turned out he'd had a fully consensual relationship with a colleague? And you can see why. I mean, there's a sense that perhaps that's gone a little bit too far, but if the alternative is for women to live in the kind of condition that we've been hearing about this morning, it's something I guess we'd have to live with. So how realistic is it? Because I accept what you say about multiple lines. How realistic is it? How easy is it for you to impose the same line on everybody?
You adapt to your environments, don't you? And the trouble is, when we have incidents like Gregg Wallace pop up, and you look at Gregg Wallace and you go, well, that's actually misogyny incarnate in plain sight.
Yes.
That's sexism incarnate in plain sight. And everybody around is all looking at it and going, oh, I don't feel comfortable with that. And they're putting it down to banter.
Yes.
And what is banter? You've got banter, which is sense of humour, but also racism, sexism, misogyny, coercion is all wrapped up in banter. And I mean, in my day job, I deal with situations that you would not get your breath at in relationships that people are having with one another, in work environments. And that's the real distinction, isn't it? There's a difference between a conversation we will have in the pub, at a nightclub, where we sort of know the rules of the game in the nightclub, to when we're in a work environment. And that's where it all starts to fall down. And that's where anything can be considered as inappropriate in a work environment. And unfortunately, we have an awful lot of women that are not only being coerced, but they're being crushed by things that are said. You heard the lady in the lift.
Yeah.
Now, there could be people
20 or 30 years ago, remember?
Yes, exactly. But you still have that relevance today, because there's still people walking around who will think, oh, well, that's all right.
No, I only mention that because of the fact that it still hurts today. That's the only reason I'm mentioning the timescale.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So, you know, it's a very complex world. It's a very complex environment. But ultimately, for men, and if there's any men listening to this, and I'm sure there are.
I hope so, mate. I got my radar bonus at the end of the year.
The world has changed, and you either need to change with it for the better, because I've got two girls. I wouldn't want my girls going anywhere near Gregg at all. But that's what I'm picking up from when I see him on the television. And we seem to have revered that for quite some time, don't we? We're saying, oh, a cheeky chappie. Oh, he's a very cheeky chappie. He's not a cheeky chappie. He's almost a sexual predator.
Well, be careful. Don't shout over me when I'm telling you to be careful. It's me that gets into trouble, not you, if you say things on the programme that are unsupportable. So you did say almost, and therefore I'll let it pass. But there is no suggestion yet that I've seen of sexual predation. It's just very, very inappropriate behaviour and one allegation of physical contact, inappropriate physical contact. And I think part of the problem is, and I'm not ticking you off, I'm just doing my homework, that part of the problem is that you could have identical comments made by the same man to two different women and have two completely different responses. That's what your original point was about with regard to the lines.
The jeans was a perfect example, wasn't it? So I would never say that to anybody, to be fair.
Nor would I.
However, some people would feel quite comfortable saying it, and some people would be quite comfortable receiving it.
Yes, exactly.
And they would see it as a compliment. However, other people would receive that. And again, it's not about what's said, it's about how it's received, which is more important. Because, you know, if somebody's offended by it, they're offended by it. If they're not offended by it, they're not offended. Which is why I say about where the line is.
Well, also, I'm trying to think of an analogy. You know what I'm like. I love my analogies, but you don't have to. It is an offence to drive while drunk. You don't actually have to do anything while drunk. You don't have to hit anyone or mow down your neighbour's wall or park in the middle of a petrol station forecourt by accident. It is an offence to drive while drunk. So it's about things that might have gone wrong. Therefore, rules in this kind of space are about the people who would be profoundly offended and profoundly hurt. You don't cite the existence of people who apparently wouldn't be as a reason why everyone should just carry on driving drunk, as it were, or presenting misogynistically.
But you'll still come across people who are quite comfortable drink and driving.
Yeah, I know you will. And defending others as people claiming they do it better when they've had a few. Just briefly, if you would, just address this text that just says, another man-hating hour on LBC.
It's crazy. What a crazy thing to say. Literally. How on earth? But then that's the problem, isn't it? Because you think of the mindset you'd need to say that as a statement.
Yes.
And that's what's wrong with men today. And I include myself in that, although I try to work very, very hard to stop myself from doing it.
Which makes you woke and pathetic and emasculated.
So. But at 62 years old, I don't mind being woke, because if it makes people around me happier, and the girls, and it makes my two girls happier and my wife happier, you know what? I'll be as woke as you like.
Oh, you and me both, mate, albeit you've got 10 years on me. And it is about being a woke in progress, isn't it, for everybody? And the psychology of pushing back against it so violently is baffling, and yet something we'll probably explore together further at a later date. Something else that's worth saying, Terry, is that you remind us all why trade unions are so important.
Oh, yes, indeed. And this is the problem, isn't it? Because as an active trade unionist, we have to navigate our way through this.
Yes.
And again, what I find really quite disturbing sometimes is people who aren't in trade unions argue against the ability for trade unions to become involved in this stuff, dignities at work, grievances and stuff like that. And it's invariably the confusion around relationships.
Yeah.
And again, I say, where that line is, it's different for everybody. So.
And of course, you remind us that without trade union representation, the places to which you can turn, the places to which you can go, the people to whom you can turn diminish violently. And you're often going to be left with no choice if you want to make a complaint except to speak to the people who are going to probably defend the alleged offender on the grounds of power and prominence. And if you bring fame and profitability into the picture, then you begin to understand how a letter containing multiple allegations of inappropriate behaviour sent to the BBC in 2022 didn't prompt any further investigation, according to the Observer yesterday. A director and producer sent the letter. A male director and producer sent, I beg your pardon, a female director and producer sent the letter on behalf of other women who had contacted her, and she said yesterday the BBC would have to, each individual would have to make their own direct complaint to the corporation. Shortly after sending the letter, she also submitted the allegations to the BBC via an external whistleblowing service, but said she'd received no further contact with regards to that support. That's the director and producer Dawn Elric. Asma Mir, who I know because she has worked here in the past, lodged complaints as long ago as 2017. Emma Kennedy, another broadcaster and writer who's a friend of mine, has revealed that she complained to production staff in 2012, alleging that he appeared to have touched another woman's bottom. And so if you're in a position of power, management style power, you just want it all to go away. Because the size of the response, the impact of a response, as we've seen, like a suspension, is going to be front page news. It's reputation protection. It always makes me think of the time I got chucked out of school, actually. And immediately, even though the school was run by monks, they moved towards protecting the institution by distancing themselves or hoping that the smoke would somehow dissipate in a way that meant there was no fire to start with. 10:47 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:50 is the time. Spot on, James, writes Julia. We've never laughed inwardly or outwardly. I've cringed the whole time. My husband has been shocked at some experiences I've shared with him because he is not like that. but probably 80% of men are and don't even realise. That's from Julia in Bridgend. And this story from Julia it made me shudder. Aged 13, dressed in my majorette uniform, my uncle, who was at the bottom of the stairs as I came down them, uttered the word "core" if I was 20 years younger. Even at that age, it made me shudder. My mum called me to finish getting ready, and my dad had a word with him. We didn't see him again for almost 2 years. As a woman in engineering, writes Florrie, sexist comments are something I'm used to. I agree with your previous caller, Jessica. It is all to do with context. It was Jennifer, I think. As to when these things can be inappropriate. What Wallace has allegedly done was not okay, and if it had been a woman doing these things in his position, she would have been viewed as crass and looked down upon, instead of it being called banter. We're back to all the lines, all the multiple lines. Sophie is in Wembley. Sophie, what would you like to say?
I think that this is quite a systemic issue, to be quite honest. The fact that Gregg Wallace has to be famous for this to be in the news is quite shocking. It shows that it happens to everyone, well, most women in the workplace. And when you look at the statistics that 9 out of 10 men commit some sort of violence or sexual act against a woman, it is every man. And it starts with men to call the men. Yeah.
I haven't seen that
That's the stat I saw last year.
Gosh.
I don't know where it came from, actually, so maybe I've made it up in my head. But
yeah, okay.
That's the stat that's been bandied around.
Well, I've only heard it bandied around by you, so in the absence of any support for it, I know that 9% of women aged 16 and over were victims of domestic abuse in the year ending March 2022. So I don't know quite where that figure comes from, but anyway, that's by the by for now. Where would you draw this line, do you think?
I think I agree with your other caller that the line is probably drawn by the person who has the least amount of bandwidth for it.
Yes.
So, for example, if you're in the workplace, then someone who does get offended by something, that's where the line is drawn. And I also agree that, context is key. And so personal relationships, you can have those interpersonal relationships at work. But then someone can complain about you and your friend having a banter, if you wish, because they are offended by what you're saying. So I think, the time and place is really key for that as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, clearly, and the absolute absence of any guidance or pushback in this case, well, who knows? Maybe they did sit him down and tell him to stop doing these things, but it clearly didn't work. Kirsty Allsop's story is interesting, not least because in many ways she's the epitome of a middle-class woman of a certain age. I'm a big admirer of Kirsty Allsop. I like the way she puts her head above the parapet and then backs herself. But that doesn't mean I always agree with her. I suspect we've got very differing views on inheritance tax for farmers, for example. But she revealed that within 1 hour of meeting Gregg Wallace, he had told her of a sex act that he and his partner had enjoyed or did enjoy every morning. Shortly after, the partner had left the room, and this was while filming a pilot. She asked, did he get off on how embarrassed I was? It was totally unprofessional. I do wonder whether any of the people texting me to call this an anti-man hour or to claim that this is all woke Guardian reading nonsense really do struggle to understand why that is inappropriate. Because I guess if you've done it yourself, and I mean, Kirsty Allsop presumably falls into this category, you haven't been told to wind your neck in and shut the flip up, because women don't do that for all the reasons that we've been discussing. To do so is to become a harridan or to paint a target on your back. I like the message I got from someone, which I've managed to lose. What you do if someone says to you, oh, if I was 20 years younger, you respond by saying, well, I would have told you to F off then as well. And my texter tells me that he didn't like that at all. That for me is a line that perfectly encapsulates innocuous banter in the eyes of some and obvious obnoxiousness in the ears of everybody else, in which case just don't say it again. It's not like you've been asked to make an enormous sacrifice or to walk around in sackcloth and ashes. Stop telling much younger women that you believe that they would have wanted to have sex with you if you were currently the same age. I mean, how hard is that to get your head around? 10:55 is the time. Anita is in Crawley. Anita, what would you like to say?
Hello, I'm so happy to talk to you, James. A big fan.
Oh, thank you.
This is my first call.
Welcome.
And I'm actually in Chorley, Lancashire, not Crawley.
Oh, well, I shall correct the record accordingly, Anita. Thank you.
I think it's my Lancashire accent that probably fell down.
You're probably unaware of the fact that you got knocked off the top of the National League North this weekend.
Oh, gosh. I did, actually.
Yeah,
I'm a Preston North End supporter. I'm a Preston North End supporter.
Fair enough. Carry on.
I do know where we're up to with that, which is not very good at the minute.
You should probably be following Chorley, but we digress. Carry on, Anita.
What I'd like to say is that I feel that this is not old dinosaurs. Back in the 78, I would be about 18. I went to work. I was a secretary, and my boss kept going a bit too near me a couple of times, and I thought, that's a bit odd. I thought, did he touch my bottom then? I'm not sure, because that's what they do quite often. Anyway, we worked in glass offices, so everyone could see everyone. So I thought, right, when he does it again, I'm going to shout him out.
Right.
So when he did it again, I shouted really loudly, if you do that again, I'm going to slap your face, really loudly. He was bright red. Everyone in the offices turned. My HR called me in. Do I want to take it any further? Do I want to make an official complaint? Everybody knew it was wrong.
Wow.
He was called in. He was talked to. He was given a dressing down. I was transferred to another department, which was my choice. They asked me what I wanted to do.
Yes.
And as I'd felt uncomfortable with him for a while, I was moved to another one. He got a new secretary. He never even looked at her, didn't even look at her. The whole thing was nipped in the bud, and it was dealt with. And I feel like a strong HR will be able to deal with it if it's nipped in the bud. And if those girls speak out. You know, my mum was quite a feminist. She was a director of an engineering company when, she used to drive around. I have her hair done every week. She was quite a little businesswoman, quite formidable woman.
Yes.
Taught me to respect myself, to speak up if anything happens and do things. And I was taught that, I don't put up with that. And I'm not saying that people that are not in a position. I was his secretary, so I was very much, 18, 20. I can't remember exactly what the age was. Very young, first job, but I still spoke up. I still was not having any of it, and yet he had all the power and I hadn't.
And that would have been, I think, a very rare experience in the 1970s, wouldn't it?
I don't know. I don't think it was as rare as people think now. I think.
The reception you received, not the treatment that he meted out to you. I mean, the fact that you were believed, that you were supported, that you were accommodated. Was it a British company?
It was. It was actually an agricultural firm.
I wonder why they had everything so right so early.
Well, they all saw what was... I don't think anyone could deny it because it was glass offices and everyone had seen the incident.
Oh, glass offices within glass offices, as it were. So you're in a... okay,
right. It was almost open. It was almost open plan.
So there was no denying it.
And I had done it intentionally, a very raised voice, so everybody heard it.
Yes.
But HR at that place was really spot on. They dealt with quite a few issues within the place, and I felt like I was supported. I always felt strongly about how I deal with things like that from that moment on because it got dealt with straight away and and it wasn't a one-off. Like I say, that company, the women there were always really well looked after.
Good.
And I think that's the secret.
Yes, and it is.
Maybe that's.
But it reminds us that the line is there to be enforced and endorsed, and you shouldn't need to be as what's the word I want? I don't want to say feisty. These are terrible mansplaining words, but a lot of women would be quite intimidated. A lot of men would be quite intimidated by drawing attention to themselves in that way, by making the stand that you made. You shouldn't have to do it, but the fact that everything happened as one would hope when you did. Assertive is the right word to use, I think. But again, you may be listening to this and well, I'm not assertive. Does that mean I deserve to be treated as... It's tricky. Language is tricky. These conversations are tricky, but you have to have them. And it would appear that not enough of these conversations have been had with Gregg Wallace, whose story, I think, is far from over. It's 11 o'clock.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 4 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Just a quick, I suppose, counterpoint to the final call that we heard in the last hour. This is from someone who's asked me not to name them. Someone in the company I currently work for said exactly this if I was 20 years younger to a very young female employee, making her really uncomfortable. He said other inappropriate comments to other young women in the company, commenting on their bodies. They complained and it was investigated by higher-up women who questioned the young women's timekeeping and attendance. It was classic victim blaming. Even I, a middle-aged woman who spoke up for them, got chastised for things that had never previously been a problem. It's so disappointing when older women who should know better join in with the nonsense. It was one of the first... I think the first times I remember realising how powerful this job can be for me, how helpful this job can be for me when I tried to understand the women who used to ring me to tell me that when they were sexually assaulted or had their bottoms pinched, whichever description you prefer, at work in the 70s and 80s, they took it as a compliment. I won't bore you again with the fruits of my thinking on that issue, but it is fascinating and easier to understand than you might imagine. In fact, and this might sound a little bit silly, it fits in with a story about vegans that I may share with you a little later in the programme. But I want to turn your attention next to Joe Biden's official pardon for his son Hunter, who was facing sentencing and probably prison for 2 criminal offences. He has 2 felony convictions. And pleaded guilty to 9 federal tax charges in Los Angeles in September. The crime essentially is falsifying records and failing to file returns during a period when he was, it is known, hooked on crack alcohol and easy cash, none of which mitigates or excuses what he has done. I find this fascinating. I broke one of my new rules this morning on Blue Sky, which is the social media platform I now favour. You can follow me there at Mr. James OB. And I kind of waded in with a strong opinion when perhaps I hadn't given it as much thought as I should have done. It wasn't particularly pungent, but I may also have been doing that anti-footballification thing that we talked about on Friday with regard to Louise Haig, where you're so conscious of wanting to be better than the people that you condemn that you end up almost not being authentic or true to yourself when attacking the people that you think are on the same side as you. So my initial thought about this, before I'd read Joe Biden's statement, was, for goodness sake, what a gift you've given to Donald Trump. And my second thought, because now all Donald Trump supporters can pretend that him excusing and pardoning all manner of miscreants and criminals is akin to Joe Biden pardoning his son, Hunter. And I'm afraid that there is a kernel of truth in those comparisons. But Donald Trump doesn't need any encouragement or precedent to behave with utter depravity and criminality and unaccountability, as we know. So then my second thought was that Joe Biden has delivered a massive screw you to his own party. I don't think he was happy about the nature in which he left office. I think he wanted to fight the last election. In his own mind, he may still believe that he would have had a better chance of winning it than Kamala Harris. So that the second bit of the pungent opinion then becomes, this is really just a big attack on his own party and the idea that he doesn't feel that the respect is sufficiently reciprocated for him to have acted in the best interests of the party. Whether they deserve to be treated like that or not, I rather pompously opined at 8 o'clock this morning, is the biggest casualty here is decency. And then I got quite a few messages, some agreeing, some disagreeing. And this was one of the disagree ones, that really stopped me in my tracks. So Biden pardoned Hunter to save his life. Hunter was prosecuted for offences that are rarely charged after an endless investigation designed to undermine Joe Biden's presidency. If Joe left Hunter to the mercy of Trump's vile Department of Justice, they'd hound him to death. Guaranteed Democrats get it. Another story that perhaps would be getting a little bit more attention if Joe Biden hadn't done what he has done involves this. Listen to these words, all right, and tell me who you think said them. We will go out and find the conspirators who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. We're going to come after you, whether it's criminally or civilly. We'll figure that out, but we're putting you all on notice. And this would include members of the news media, who the Speaker deems complicit in efforts to kneecap Trump. It is known, of course, that Joe Biden won the 2020 election. Literally nobody, sensible or honest, pretends otherwise. Donald Trump's diabolical genius involves an ability to gloss over this and to behave in a manner that makes it matter less than it should to everybody else. Historians of the future will perhaps wonder why Joe Biden didn't pursue Donald Trump with rather more alacrity for the offences against America that he incited on January the 6th. But none of that matters. If you've got people in positions of prominence who are still claiming that the lies were the truth and that the people who were telling the truth were the liars, well, not only have you got Nazi 101 comparisons to draw, but you've also got reasons to fear for the very heart of democracy in America. Because I kid you not, the man who said this about going after the people who told the truth in 2020 is the man that Donald Trump announced this weekend as the future head, or his chosen head, of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. So another part of his mission will be to go after members of the government or members of the civil service who are not sufficiently loyal to the Führer. The leader. He will be going after all sorts of characters deemed to be insufficiently loyal to Donald Trump, who, I think it's probably worth reminding you, has 34 felony convictions compared to Hunter Biden's 2. So that was my first thought, was it doesn't matter how tiny the comparison is. It will be cited forevermore by supporters of Donald Trump as proof that whatever it is he's doing is not that bad because Joe Biden did it as well. It doesn't have to be true. How many times have we talked about fig leaves together? How many times have we said these people who don't like understanding things or can't understand things, perhaps, to be a little bit kinder, or who love the corruption, they love the depravity. I think we really underestimate this. It's relevant to the conversation we had in the last hour. Idiots like me thought that when that tape of Donald Trump boasting about grabbing women by their genitals became public, that would be the end for him. But of course, lots of men loved that. Lots of men dream of being able to behave like that. The kind of men sending me messages in the last hour talking about this being man-hating, or this just being banter, or this being woke. I don't know what your lives are like, but you dream of having a life like Donald Trump's, where you can march up to women and grab them by their genitals, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it because there's nothing they can do about it because you're a star. So we know that exists, which means that offering these people the opportunity to claim that Joe Biden was just as bad as their man is actually not the offence that I thought it was. It doesn't matter, does it? Donald Trump is not going to do anything worse than what he was planning to do already, or what he was going to do already. He's not going to do anything more as a consequence of Joe Biden giving a pardon to Hunter Biden. I think that's probably as close to a fact as you can get in the context of speculation. But what Joe Biden has done is give the rape apologists, the cheerleaders, the facilitators of criminality, the liars, the people who wanted to murder Mike Pence on January the 6th, he's given them a fig leaf to pretend that they believe there is a valid comparison to be drawn. He was going to do all of the awful things he will do anyway. So then the question becomes one of possible humanity. Hunter Biden is clearly a very vulnerable and troubled man. If you prefer, a very vulnerable and troubled criminal. And I think Joe Biden worried he might die in jail. Certainly being de facto tortured by the DOJ seems a very real prospect, given what the head of the FBI, the putative head of the FBI, has said about going after people whose crime is to have told the truth. What on earth would they do with people perceived to be sworn enemies of Donald Trump's who have actually committed crimes? And so I'm going to read it to you. Today I signed a pardon for my son Hunter. From the day I took office, I said I would not interfere with the Justice Department's decision-making, and I kept my word, even as I have watched my son being selectively and unfairly prosecuted. Without aggravating factors like use in a crime, multiple purchases, or buying a weapon as a straw purchaser, people are almost never brought to trial on felony charges solely for how they filled out a gun form. Those who were late paying their taxes because of serious addictions, but paid them back subsequently with interest and penalties, are typically given non-criminal resolutions. It is clear that Hunter was treated differently. The charges in this case came about only after several of my political opponents in Congress instigated them to attack me and oppose my election. Then a carefully negotiated plea deal, agreed by the Department of Justice, unravelled in the courtroom, with a number of my political opponents in Congress taking credit for bringing political pressure on the process. Had the plea deal held, it would have been a fair, reasonable resolution of Hunter's cases. No reasonable person who looks at the facts of Hunter's cases can reach any other conclusion that Hunter was singled out only because he is my son. And that is wrong. And that's my problem here, is we keep thinking everybody's a reasonable person. And we know that they're not. Biden goes on, there has been an effort to break Hunter, who has been 5.5 years sober, even in the face of unrelenting attacks and selective prosecution. In trying to break Hunter, they've tried to break me, and there's no reason to believe it will stop here. Enough is enough. For my entire career, I have followed a simple principle. Just tell the American people the truth, they'll be fair-minded. Well, here's the truth. I believe in the justice system, but as I have wrestled with this, I also believe raw politics has infected this process and it led to a miscarriage of justice. And once I made this decision this weekend, there was no sense in delaying it further. I hope Americans will understand why a father and a president would come to this decision. And I think I do now, albeit that I reached immediately for the claim that decency was under fire or decency was the biggest casualty. He had to pardon his son. If he didn't pardon his son, then he would watch a 5-year sober drug addict go into a jail environment where he would be unlikely to emerge alive. I don't think it will change anything that Trump and his team will or will not do. I'm not sure anyone should have the power to pardon anyone in this way, but he does. So he's used it. I think that Donald Trump's just made someone he pardoned the next ambassador to Paris, hasn't he? His son-in-law's dad. And I saw one post from someone saying it's one law for Biden's family and another law for everyone else. And the community note on that said, well, you got pardoned by Trump a few years ago. That was a prominent Republican. So that idea of equivalence or balance is just not for sensible people. Voters have forgiven Trump, writes the journalist James Ball, for launching an insurrection, committing 34 felonies, for the grab them by the bleep, for sharing classified documents, for being a court-adjudicated rapist, and for much, much more. The idea that Democrat voters won't be forgiven for pardons is from another era. So, and of course, he lost his other son as well in tragic circumstances. 17 minutes after 11 is the time. So how much does this matter? To followers of American politics or to people like me who perhaps should have done a little bit more homework before they waded in with their size 10s at 8 o'clock this morning. At first glance, my heart sank. It truly did, because I deal a lot with the insensibles, or whatever you want to call them, the people who either pretend to believe things that are demonstrably untrue, or, arguably even more frightening, the people who truly believe things that are demonstrably untrue. I can't tell the difference anymore. There's going to be everybody in Trump's administration, including people who called out January the 6th for the abomination that it was, now pretending that it was entirely justified, or that there was nothing to see here, or that nothing was done wrong. I'd like to think that anybody condemning Joe Biden for doing what he's doing now makes it impossible for Donald Trump to pardon all the people that he's minded to pardon. But that's back to the politics of the sensible, the politics of sensible people. And that is not what we're talking about here. One thing troubles me. I didn't know whether or not Joe Biden should have been so outwardly chummy with Trump when they met for the handover, something that I don't think Trump bothered to do when the power was moving in the other direction. But I don't know. What should he have done? He seems now to have, in this statement, recognised the depravity of the administration that is coming into the White House. He seems now to have recognised that the pursuit of his son on, let's just say, magnified and exaggerated charges would be done to break Hunter Biden in the hope of somehow hurting Joe Biden, even though there's no earthly way Joe Biden's going to be returning to the political fray anytime soon. He became the first child of a sitting president to be convicted of a crime, but Donald Trump, of course, became the first former president to be committed by a crime. And Donald Trump immediately uses it to call for or to refer to the insurrectionists of January the 6th, the people who were baying for the blood of his own vice president, as a somehow comparable issue. And for the record, I think he probably will pardon them now. And I wonder whether Biden has made it easier. I don't know. But I do know this. It's huge in one sense and tiny in another. And I want to know which way you jump. 20 minutes after 11 is the time. I don't like asking questions like, how big a deal is this? In fact, I was taking a mickey out of another radio presenter in another building earlier for asking the question, what do you think of this? Because it is in many ways the laziest question you can ask. But some days it's the only question you can ask. Do you know what I'd do? Or do you know what I'd say? If it was my son, I'd have done the same thing. But that's probably why I shouldn't be president. Does that work, or is that too glib? Joe Biden is supposed to be, you remember what Michelle Obama said, when they go low, we go high. But you're asking an old man to watch his only surviving son go into an environment that would quite possibly kill him. And you have the power to stop it from happening. And you know that the only reason he's being pushed into that environment is the political vendetta of his opponents. Donald Trump threatened to withdraw support for Volodymyr Zelensky's Ukraine if Zelensky didn't help him conjure up problems for Biden. So, again, what do you think of this, or how big a deal is this? Is a question I'd like to hear your answers to. Because, listen, maybe I'm doing that thing. But I don't see how anyone can look at Donald Trump's charge sheet and look at Hunter Biden's and think one of them deserves to be in jail and the other one deserves to be in the White House. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. So I don't think he should have done it, but I think I probably would have done as well. And that's why it's an interesting question to seek to unravel. 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 23 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. There's some amazing reasonings here, some amazing thoughts. Biden has realised he can no longer protect the American people, so he is going to protect his son. I wonder whether many of the people weighing in on this are familiar with the number of pardons given by Donald Trump during the course of his first administration. I think there were 144. I could have got that wrong. I'm sort of looking at some of them now. And the vast majority were to persons to whom Trump had a personal or political connection, or persons for whom executive clemency served a political goal. So I suppose in a way I'm asking how naive it is to suggest that by doing this, Biden robs Trump's critics of some high ground. I think it does, but you can't fault him for doing it, given the alternative and given the absurdity of the legal cases against Hunter Biden, and of course the deliberate dismantling of the plea deal that had been agreed with the Department of Justice. But I wonder how much any of that matters to people who are just looking for an opportunity to continue their rape apologism or their cheerleading for a 34 felony count convict. It's 25 after 11. Claire's in York. Claire, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I followed this really closely, actually.
That makes one of us.
Well, for years, the Republicans were determined to try and find some serious dirt on Hunter Biden, and Trump appointed a special counsel to find serious dirt. And Biden kept that special counsel when he became president. And when this special counsel couldn't find any more serious dirt, he knew, as I've heard many lawyers from all, Republicans and Democrats, that for this crime, it just wasn't serious enough to take to trial and custodial sentencing. So
it's important to remember that in the United States, judges are often political appointments. Certainly the Supreme Court judges are, but also they stand for election and they seek the patronage of politicians.
It's all wrong,
it's clearly being pursued by allies of Donald Trump or enemies of Joe Biden. But still, a conviction's a conviction. There was a jury in that court.
And so when this special counsel got to the end of the road and knew that it wasn't right to pursue it into a trial, he reached a plea deal with Hunter Biden. And this really angered Republicans in Congress. And they demanded that special counsel come to Congress, and they questioned him and they put pressure on him to pursue the trial. So then the special counsel turned around and then took back the plea deal and pursued it. Now, because of this, I think Biden had no choice but to pardon his son, because his son would not have come to this end had it not been for Biden's position as president and being in a war with the Republicans. So I think it would have Hunter would have paid for his father being a president. Now the difference is that his crimes wouldn't have led to a custodial sentence. The difference is Trump's crimes of election fraud and storing and sharing information, boxes of information, classified information. Anyone else would have been in prison by now. That is the truth of it, and that is the double standard. And unfortunately, I think this will give succor to Republicans and Trump, who will howl give more justification for their howls of a Justice Department,
But even so, what you've got, and this is, I think, where those of us who are still sort of married to the idea of politics being susceptible to logical analysis or kind of, open-mindedness, this is where we struggle. You've got someone he's putting in charge of the FBI who's come about as close as you can come to saying we're going after our enemies, regardless of whether they're guilty or not. So, I mean, how much more?
They want to put journalists into prison.
Yes.
I mean,
down with that sort of thing, Claire. For the record, down with that sort of thing. For the record, let's be clear about that.
You can't get more politically motivated than the Republicans and Trump when it comes to the justice system. I mean, Biden tried to abide by keeping a distant. I mean, if he had been more political, he would have got Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, to go quicker and he should have really put pressure on him to go quicker on the investigations into Trump, because they are serious crimes that Trump committed, and they're dangerous to democracy, the crimes he committed. So I mean, there is no comparison between Democrats and Biden and what Trump is doing.
And it would be a waste of time and energy for people who don't like seeing an adjudicated rapist get into the White House, or a multiple felon, or however you prefer to typify Donald Trump, a liar. None of that really matters. Giving ammunition to his supporters is a relatively meaningless concept, because they don't really need any more ammunition. Once you've abandoned truth and embraced depravity, Joe Biden's calculation will be, this is as nothing compared to what we're up against. Trump has promised revenge. He has a chance to protect his last remaining son from what is not, by any objective account, fair justice. Decency left the building when Trump was re-elected, so get your boy out of this situation.
I mean, I think any father would well, given the fact that that his son was being persecuted because of his job, not because of the law, but because of his job, I think he had to. But I mean, it won't change the future crimes that Trump might do. It won't make him more likely to do that. But it will affect the narrative, which is a real shame. But I don't see any other way.
Why do you follow it so closely, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I used to live in America.
Yeah.
I went to school in America. I follow I follow American politics very, very closely, and I'm so allergic to Trump.
Yes.
Of
course you are.
Tell you, I'm obsessively allergic to. I've been in quite a deep depression since the election. Actually.
I'm sure. Well, you know what's coming.
I feel quite tearful about it, and what I fear now is that because of the left's propensity here to want to burnish their journalistic false balance, we are risking now a Farage Tory government.
We're going to usher in a pound shop version of Donald Trump, because the media in this country is still, it arguably could be worse than the media in America at calling out obvious crypto-fascism when you see it. Well, Colette, I think, is on the same page as you. She says, bookmark this hour, James. Review it in 4 years' time. We will all marvel at this pearl-clutching regarding Biden in light of the onslaught of corruption and destruction endured during Trump's second term. So Colette's suggesting we'll look back and find the hand-wringing over what Joe Biden has done absurd and ridiculous, given what it presaged, given what follows. Claire, thank you. I'm lucky to have listeners like you, even more so when you call in and share the fruits of your research. 32 after 11 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headline.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:35. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Oh, well, look, maybe people don't fully appreciate just how bad Hunter Biden's crimes were. And among the evidence presented in court, prosecutors said that he targeted his own brother-in-law, who was cooperating with authorities against him, and then hired a prostitute to seduce the man. So he hired a prostitute to seduce his own brother-in-law with the intention of getting a video recording of it and sending the footage to his brother-in-law's wife, i.e. his own sister. So he stands accused of hiring a prostitute to seduce his own brother-in-law, his wife's husband, and then send a video. Oh, I'm so sorry. That's not Hunter Biden at all. That's Jared Kushner's dad, who Donald Trump has just made ambassador to Paris. And this is the point, isn't it? This is what Claire in York was touching on, and why so many of you have been in touch to express admiration. So Charles Kushner is going as first pick for ambassador to Paris. It's not entirely clear what qualifications he has, but he did plead guilty to federal charges of tax evasion, campaign finance offences and witness tampering, and was sentenced to 2 years in prison in 2005. I've just shared some of the evidence that was presented in court against him. So he becomes, he's also been pardoned by Trump. And that's the problem. Jamie thought I'd made a mistake there. Jamie, it's all about the theatre. Did you think I'd made a mistake as well? I think Eleanor thought I was making a mistake there as well. You could hear the lawyers going, oh my God, what's he done? No, that was a deliberate little bit of theatre. Pretending that what the man Donald Trump is sending to Paris as ambassador had done was what Hunter Biden had done. Whereas, of course, when you compare the two, you realise it's absolutely absurd that there should be controversy surrounding the pardon of one and silence about the pardoning and promotion of the other. So I think this is all part of the problem that Claire was detailing. We sit here still trying to make sense of it all. I don't think it gets much further than some people love this violence, the sexual violence, the moral violence, the depravity. People love it. In the run-up to the election, and we were not as shocked as others on the, I don't even want to say liberal anymore, because there'll be loads of people who consider themselves right-wing who are just as repulsed by what's happening in the United States as those of us who consider ourselves liberals are. So this notion that there is a case to answer here of a comparable stature to what Trump does. That's where we are. How we've got to make sense of this. Has he ceded the moral high ground? Oh, dear. Meanwhile, Trump is sending this man who, I've just told you, a small smidgen of his offences, sending him to America, to Paris, to represent the United States of America. So in the run-up to that election, I must just apologise to Iris, who's been in touch to say, I hope you realise you just caused me to choke on my minced tart. Few things worse at 11:30 in the morning, Iris, than choking on a minced tart. So I do apologise. And the point being, of course, that you can't make sense of it. The only thing you can make sense of, and the weird thing about this is it includes people I've broken bread with. It includes people I have in the past expressed some admiration of. It includes people I've been colleagues with. They like it. They like the sexual violence. They like to see a man in power who has boasted about how little respect he has for any of the basic parameters of decency, morality, ethics, integrity, whatever it may be. A man who would paint a target on the back of his own vice president. And the naivety of thinking, oh, that's a deal breaker. Thinking January the 6th was going to be that. I learned nothing from the genitals grabbing tape. Nothing at all. I thought, well, that'll be it then. You look around at people in the public sphere in the United Kingdom and you think, well, that, come on. I mean, how embarrassing is it going to be? All you got to do is say, whoa, I thought I knew the guy. I thought I knew what he stood for. I had no idea that he privately boasts about sex offending, unless, of course, you've been with him in private and you enjoyed him boasting about sex offending. So you sit there and you think, well, that'll be it. That's him done for. And then there's all the other stuff, insulting the soldiers, the dead, Gold Star, military veterans' family, mocking disabled people, all of it. I mean, the list is endless. And then the crimes, the countless crimes for which he will no doubt now not face any proper justice. And on it goes, and on it goes. And you sort of think, well, that. And then even on January the 6th, you still thought, well, I still thought, oh, there it is. There's the straw that broke the camel's back. He's just sort of sought to launch a violent coup against his own state after losing an election. That's it now. No one's going to be... And yet here we are. I'm drinking liberal tears. I love it. But you don't. You don't love the tears of the liberals. You love the sexual violence. You love the contempt for the rule of law. You love the abandonment of decency. The contempt for integrity. You love all of that because secretly you wish you could behave like that yourself. And that message we got in the last hour when, oddly, because I can't imagine Gregg Wallace and Donald Trump, although there are some parallels here, I suppose. That message we got about, I told my husband about how men speak and how men behave, and he just couldn't believe it because he's not like that. But I think, wrote my female correspondent, I think 80% of people are. 80% of men are like that. And you sort of go, yeah, maybe not 80%, that's a bit bleak. But everyone's still sticking up for this guy. They love it. It's not that they're holding their nose because they think he's going to do great things for the health service, or they're holding their nose because they think he's going to be good for the economy. They actively love the sexual violence, the impunity, the contempt for the rule of law, the racism, the sexism, the misogyny, all of it. They love it. You can't get your head around that. The media's never going to be able to report in those terms. It's too... I don't know, too frightened, stroke decent, stroke cowed. What is it? All of that. So anyway, tell me how awful it is that Joe Biden's pardoned his son. 0345 6060 973. Alex is in Chiswick. Alex, what do you reckon?
Hi, good morning. Well, I think what Biden has done is morally reprehensible, and it's really an unpardonable sin. And if I may, I'll just try and unpick that for you briefly in my viewpoint. So most people would know that in political life and business life, in theory, individuals in positions of influence are supposed to recuse themselves from decision-making where a personal friend or a family relative is involved. And that means that independent decision-making on things like pardon should take place, or compensation payments. And indeed, if you look at a lot of banks and big law firms have anti-nepotism policies for precisely this reason. Now, I'm not saying they're always observed. They may be observed more in breach than adherence, if you will. But if you start from that premise, whilst we understand the natural and human desire of any father to help his son and use any position of influence, what Biden has done is directly contravene these, I'll call them, principles of natural justice that require you to recuse yourself.
But they're not. No, the Constitution doesn't subscribe to those particular principles of natural justice. I agree with you that it should. Under my glorious rule, no president would have the right to pardon anybody who'd been found guilty in a court of law. But that's not the world that Joe Biden inhabits, Alex. It might, if he was the CEO of a law firm, then he wouldn't be able to do what he's done now for the reasons that you describe. I think Jimmy Carter pardoned his own brother. Trump pardoned 144 different individuals, including the fellow I was just telling you about that he's sending to Paris as ambassador. I'm not arguing that two wrongs make a right. I'm just arguing that natural justice has no place in this conversation.
Well,
it should do, but it doesn't.
That's the point. But if I may just,
of course,
or if you can humour me on as I advance that analysis briefly. The point about natural justice is, at some level of abstraction, natural justice and principles of right and wrong do make a difference. Now, I'm not a fan of Trump, and it seems to me, therefore, no amount of Trump bashing, and it's easy to bash Trump because there's a lot to bash him with, will, by reference to moral relativism, make Biden's decision a good decision. And the bigger concern I have is not only what he's done is wrong, what he's done is he's gifted a nuclear weapons-grade missile to the Republicans who accuse, of course, everybody accuses everybody of sleazy behaviour all the time. He's given the Republicans a nuclear-grade missile to fire at the Democrats.
I thought that at 8 o'clock this morning. The more I've thought about it, the more I've retreated or recused myself. Not recused, I've retreated from that position because it's a bit like, I mean, they've got all the nuclear weapons. You can't give them more. It's incapable of adding to their arsenal. There's no earthly way that Trump and his people are going to go after anybody with more alacrity than they would have done anyway as a consequence of this pardon.
That's true. I think that's actually, let me say, I think that's a very fair point. But I think in the minds of the voting public, whereas it's easy to look at Trump and some of his more reprehensible behaviours and say, and how people vote for him, that's up to them, but you're, I'll say, in quotes, a bad dude.
Yeah.
But the Democrats are supposed to come from a slightly morally higher ground. And I think, if you will, Biden's legacy is to some extent, we'll have to, history will write this, but torpedo the claim to that higher ground. And I think...
I hope you're wrong. You could be right. I would have agreed with you at 8 o'clock. I don't agree with you now, in part because of reading the statement in full, which I hadn't done when I stuck my size 10s in straight away. And I think, I'm not American, but I think that the sense that he's done what any dad would do will actually mitigate almost entirely any electoral or voter impact of what you're describing.
Well, I understand the viewpoint, James. I respectfully disagree with my
hope. This kind of politeness will never catch on. If you want to go viral, you're going to have to shout, "I hate you," at the top of your voice.
No, polite discourse is everything. But I think it will... Let's hope there's no more of this on either side, but I'm afraid, as we all know in the world we live in, there's going to be plenty more of it. But I wish you'd have thought about it a bit more, just as a personal viewpoint.
Yes.
I think at the end of his term, what an unfortunate... I use fatalistic language, epitaph this is to his presidency. He's not served in the end. It's not, when we look back, this will be, perhaps the first thing that we look at the lens through when we look back at the Biden tenure. At least that's whether it's fair or just or not doesn't really matter. The idea that people, we've already seen one bad actor claiming that it's proof of double standards. Well, it took a Twitter community note to register that he was literally pardoned himself by Donald Trump during the first term. So, I mean, we're doing that thing again where you think that at some point the truth will surely matter. Back to that Orwell quote, there is truth and there is untruth. If you can hold on to the truth, even if you are the only one, you will not go mad. Well, that's different. You might not go mad, but it doesn't mean it's ever going to matter. In the context of Donald Trump, I can say it, 11:47 on Monday, the 2nd of December, 2024, I don't think the truth is ever going to matter. Not politically, not legally, and not morally. The truth is never going to matter. That process that began when Kellyanne Conway talked about alternative facts as a euphemism, a synonym for lies, blatant, barefaced, provable, obvious, conscious lies, that machine that was set in motion that day is never, ever, ever going to be halted as long as Donald Trump is behind the wheel. Ever. Happy days.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10 to 12 is the time. This may be a little bit not inappropriate, unhelpful. You sort of expect Joe Biden to sit there in 2 or 3 years' time and his son's in jail and possibly back on drugs. Quite hard not to be in UK jails. I presume it's similar in the States. And he could be comforted by the thought, well, at least I didn't exercise my constitutional right to pardon him, even though the case against him was so absurd. At least we've got the moral high ground. At least we've got the moral... And yet, there's that little bit of you that thinks, as Alex just articulated very well, the idea that it hands some sort of gift to the to the enemies of depravity? I don't know. I beg your pardon, to the supporters of depravity. Sarah's in Bromley. Sarah, what do you reckon?
The thing I find fascinating for me over this is that I assume that the rule of law in America is the same as the rule of law here. And it absolutely isn't.
No, you're not wrong.
And so what we're looking at, or I'm looking at, is how can somebody who believes in the rule of law pardon their son?
Yes.
Actually, pardoning Hunter Biden is something that every president can do. And for me, sitting here this morning, I feel that my respect for American democracy has dropped even further. And although I think we have huge faults in our system would never be here. And it worries me how much we admire the states.
Well, I don't know if we do at the moment, but I mean, historically we certainly have. And you know, sometimes I try not to pay much attention when people like Jacob Rees-Mogg are talking. But when you hear them talking about judges, independent judges, and how decisions should be taken by politicians, not by independent judges, you realise that they look at what you're describing and feel envy or feel... they love the idea of elected politicians being able to exercise absolutely unqualified power. And that's why they trump up all of these nonsense arguments against the European Court of Human Rights or whatever else it may be. They don't like the idea of an independent judiciary because an independent judiciary, as we saw with the prorogation of Parliament that Rees-Mogg was complicit in, is a brake upon that kind of government, that kind of behaviour. So you're right, it is quite difficult for people immersed in British politics to understand. Is it Oscar Wilde or George Bernard Shaw, Sarah, who said we're two countries divided by a common language? Never more so than in the law when it comes to the rule of law and the role of the Constitution. But beyond that, though, looking at the story through the American lens, how big a deal do you think it is? Is it going to resonate far beyond today?
I think the country is so divided. I think the country is so set in a world that when I'm standing here, I don't understand. I cannot understand how the whole of the system has got to where it has got to. But that's because I am looking at it through the lens of a very different worldview. Yeah. So... honestly, who knows? I mean, the fact that basically who is president is partially dependent on how much money they can raise.
And then, of course, you start rewarding the people who gave you the money, whether you're Republican or Democrat. But for me, that figure, I should have double-checked it was correct, but 144 pardons in Trump's first. How many of them could you name? And then Biden does this. And these lines here from Kash Patel, the appointee to head of the FBI, unless I think the Senate or Congress steps in to stop it. But the idea that this is... somehow two sides of the same coin is ridiculous. We will go out and find the conspirators who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. This was him talking to Steve Bannon, who, of course, has recently been released from jail and is a key consigliere to Donald Trump historically. We're going to come after you, whether it's criminally or civilly. We'll figure that out, but we're putting you all on notice. So again, I don't know whether or not these people believe the nonsense that they're spouting or whether they are buying into the nonsense that they're spouting for personal advancement. But I guess it doesn't really matter. Sarah, thank you. Let's go to the other side of the world. Tom's in Melbourne. Tom, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Lovely to speak to you.
Likewise.
Thank you. And I was just calling to say, I think for me, the lesson here is like the Democrats ran a campaign on conventional Constitution, right? They talked about Trump being a danger to the Constitution, and that lost them votes because what the public told them is we're tired of the conventional Constitution, right? So I think this is a great opportunity for the Dems to basically look at what Biden has done with his son and also everything that Trump has done and basically go, we're wiping the slate clean. For the next 4 years, we're going to talk about reform the Constitution, right? But for them to get credibility, they can't just point to Trump. They also have to point to Biden and say, we're putting that all behind us. This is the new Democratic face, and these are the reforms that we want to put in place. Because they know that Trump is going to have so many, stories around his mishaps or, crazy stories through some of his appointments that he's already done. So the Democrats they can't be on the back foot of having to defend. So
in a way, they steal Trump's clothes, but in the honest version. So you're saying the system isn't working, the system needs serious change. And Trump sold that idea by promising to go after people who tell the truth and criminalise. Right. Whereas there is an argument for the system needing serious change, except it would be the other way round. And the first thing you'd start with is the ability of a president to pardon people because he's related to them or because they've done him a favour or possibly made massive donations to his campaign fund. Who knows why Donald Trump pardoned so many people?
Absolutely. But if they just point to what Trump had done, they're going to look like hypocrites. They almost have to acknowledge that some of the, especially this example with Biden around his son, they also have to own that the Democratic Party, and basically say, all of that, we're wiping that slate clean. This is the reforms that we should be almost like resetting the Constitution. Right.
So, does the scale not matter? If you got 1 million things on one side and one thing on the other, can you really say they're both as bad as each other?
Objectively, no, but
in the crucible of the kind of politics we're looking at now, you can. Absolutely,
right? So it's almost like, for me, I think the Dems have to almost like, move away from the Obama-Biden era of the last 10 years, right? They need to almost refresh and start a set and almost put in a new face.
What the heck is that going to look like?
Exactly. And I think then it's down to who do they promote, who are the new faces coming up. And I think there is a lot. There's a lot of talented Democrats that are coming up, but it's going to be about how do they present themselves as a new party with new ideas and reform being at the center and tapping into the anti-establishment feeling that America is going through. Well, it feels like the whole world is going through at the moment.
Nicely put. The whole world. You're absolutely right. And actually, I mean, perhaps tying in with your point, Barack Obama issued loads and loads and loads of pardons as well. You'll find huge differences when you look into the what for of it. But for those of us, I think, as Sarah articulated on this side of the Atlantic, or even on your side of the world, with very different legal systems, very different political systems, the idea of they tried to do it for Owen Paterson in a way, I suppose, didn't they, when he was caught breaking the rules in the House of Commons. Rees-Mogg, Johnson and the rest of them and their friends in the right-wing media tried to abolish the rule book rather than see their mate being punished. So you know what they dream of. America's constitution allows it to be realised, but once again you find yourself reflecting on the fact that the founding fathers never really saw anything or anyone like this on the horizon. Thank you. It's nice to know we're spreading the world. And the next caller would have been from Lyon in France, but we have run out of time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The time now is 12 minutes.
James O'Brien on LBC.
2 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The next story is data-based. Another theory behind crime's growing importance. This is the data editor at the Times, Tom Calver, who does some extraordinary work. In fact, him and John Byrne Murdoch at the Financial Times are among my favourite journalists because data is, in many ways, the bricks with which everything should be built. And looking at crime, looking indeed at the gulf between the perception of crime and the reality of crime, looking at why we always think crime is rising even when it isn't. It's a great piece. I've reposted it from my Blue Sky account, and I've just done so again in case you want to follow this. It's the 7th post in the thread that interests me the most because it knocked the stuffing out of me a bit. It's a figure on faith in policing, particularly among women, where it's much worse. But I'm looking at Netherlands, Germany, Spain, Ireland, France and the UK. And I'm looking at a question that says, on a scale of 0 to 10, how much do you trust the police? This one is women only. It comes from the European Social Survey. And it tracks from, I think, 2000 to today, certainly prior to 2005 to today. And the Spanish figure has a little bit of a wobble between 2010 and 2014 or so, but is more or less a straight climb. The Dutch figure is more or less a straight climb. The German figure rises from about 6.6 to about 7 over the course of this 14 or so year period. The Irish one is very wobbly. I don't know why that is. The Irish one starts off going down, then goes up, then goes down again, and then goes up a lot. So they are all, except France, higher than they were at the beginning. No, they're all much, much higher than they were at the beginning, but France is the only one that is currently on a downward trajectory until you come to the United Kingdom. Until you come to the United Kingdom, where the figure in approximately 2016 begins to plummet. So on a scale of 0 to 10, and this applies to men and women, although it's more stark among women, in Britain, the answer to the question, on a scale of 0 to 10, how much trust do you have in the police, starts off at about 6.1, climbs steadily throughout 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, where it reaches about just over 6.6. So it's gone up from about 6.1 to about 6.7. And then it plummets. It goes off a metaphorical cliff and hits 5.8. If you're not on Blue Sky, you can, I'm sure, find this. You're looking for the European Social Survey on the faith in policing question. How much do you trust the police? And given that it goes back to 2016, it can't be explained. I mean, the continuing decline will include the case of Sarah Everard and others. But 2016 is the beginning. 2015, actually. 2015 is the beginning of the plummet. The people I'd really like to talk to me about this are police officers, about how the job has changed, the nature of the job has changed. We have such a strange relationship with the police, don't we? There's 2 stories recently that really highlighted how broken public discourse has become with regard to the police. In that when the Farage riots, as many people refer to them, were unfolding in this country, where people who took the quotes testimony, end quotes, of a man facing sex trafficking charges as reliable, caused a huge groundswell of fury and anger that culminated in people trying to set fire to hotels containing refugees. The speed with which people then turned their attacks on the police, in fact, I mean, the police came under attack on those nights, was extraordinary. And then not long afterwards, the police officer who was acquitted of all charges with regards to the shooting of Chris Cabba had his case heard in court. And if you weren't listening at the time, I don't know whether he wants me to do this or not, but I've made a decision not to mention his name all the time because he is an innocent man who, in my view, should never really have gone on trial in the first place. But that is a conversation that we've already had. And then suddenly the public were great big fans of the police. And yet it's the same service, it's the same force. You still have that case at Manchester Airport that the CPS will be working its way through. The more complicated it is, the longer it takes. But that which saw an officer filmed on CCTV footage being attacked, and also another officer filmed on CCTV footage doing an apparent attack. You see people's pendulum of support for the police swinging according to who was getting attacked and who wasn't. So that's really unhelpful. Really unhelpful because, and then of course ethnicity and age come into it. So as a middle-aged, middle-class white man, I've always really, even when I was under arrest as a teenager, I've always seen the police as being on my side. You are raised, if you are raised like I was, to find a police officer. If you are lost or if you need help. And that has always really been my experience. I've always had a very positive view of the police until you come up against the stories that don't involve you, where the corruption is obvious, or the bad behaviour is obvious, or the racism is obvious, or the sexism, or the homophobia, or whatever it may be. And then the more you learn about what was commonplace in the 70s, I grew up in the West Midlands, the West Midlands Serious Crime Squad. I grew up with an Irish name, the treatment of the Guildford Four or the Birmingham Six. You realise that imbuing these human beings with any level of respect or thinking that they must be somehow different from any other group of human beings is probably a bit naive. Let's talk about radio presenters. You stick 100 radio presenters in a room, how many of them are going to be wrong-uns? How many of them are going to have criminal tendencies? How many of them are going to be sexist or homophobic or misogynistic or racist? Would it really be any different with the police? So that the humanity of the police force becomes another reason why the rose-tinted spectacles lose their power. But none of that explains why it's gone off a cliff since 2015. None of that explains why in the last 10 years, trust in the police in this country has plummeted. And I want you to tell me why. I really welcome, on days like today, overviews. It doesn't have to, I don't even know how interesting it will be to form a long queue of people telling me why their personal trust in the police has plummeted, because that's not necessarily going to be relevant to the bigger picture. One bad experience does not a statistic make. Or if you want to be a little bit more cliched about it, the plural of anecdote altogether now is not data. So, I lost trust in the police because they didn't investigate my bicycle being stolen. You sort of go, well, that doesn't really necessarily and was it really that much better in 2015? When did I get burgled? Let's see, so say 16 years ago. Yeah, so I might have lost trust in the police in about 2008 or 2006 or thereabouts. But that's pointless because my house got burgled and I didn't think they did much about it. But that doesn't explain why the whole population has seen trust in the police plummet since 2015. So that is why today is one of those days where I'm not worshipping at the altar of experience. It can be an opinion you've arrived at, a conclusion you've arrived at as a consequence of watching society. 0345 6060973. Why do you think the population's trust in the police has gone off a cliff since 2015? And again, I say, if you are a police officer, I'd really like to know what you think on 0345 6060973. Some of the answers will be obvious, but I still want to hear them from people who are qualified to make them. If you pay peanuts and you cut the staff to the bone, you will get monkeys, says Simon. Austerity is catching up with the country. One of the last attempt I made at doing some proper journalism, by which I mean not just saying to Henry Riley, could you look into this, or saying to Eleanor, we should do this next week, can you get me a guest? Because it involved someone who wanted to keep their identity secret. And it was about police training. And it was concerns from somebody working in the arena of police training that the calibre of candidates they were getting was pitifully low. And even with that pitifully low standard, they were still bending the rules to let people in who couldn't even get over the bar that had been set much lower than it was 10 or 20 years ago. And if that were true, and I think it was, although I couldn't persuade him to breach his anonymity, if that were true, then that would explain some of this, because we would now be seeing the consequences of austerity. We would now be seeing the consequences of getting rid of the more experienced and effective officers to replace them with cheaper, less experienced officers. And who's drawn to the police now? This is a really scary question. Who's drawn to join? Who would want to join the police when you can get people throwing bricks and bottles at you because people like Nigel Farage have been misrepresenting the facts on social media? Who would want to join the police when you are widely, or when the force is increasingly perceived as not having bad apple problems, but having institutional problems? If you were black, why would you want to join an institutionally racist service, especially if the bloke at the head of it rejected the use of the phrase institutionally racist, no matter how many times it appeared in official reports. Rob points out the whole culture of the country has fallen off a cliff since about 2015. I wonder whether you can put the day that David Cameron called the referendum as being the moment when everything went into reverse gear, everything went into decline in this country. But I don't know. But I do know that the broader overview is going to be a little bit more interesting than the individual experience. And I say that because I know that my individual experience is not very helpful when it comes to understanding that this extraordinary, and I use the word advisedly, once a day, that's going to be my new rule. And if I pull that off, then I'll give you the money myself. It is an extraordinary figure. It's gone down. I can use it more than once as long as I'm using it in the same context. So I can call one thing extraordinary. It doesn't mean I can only say the word once. I can call one thing extraordinary. And this graph is extraordinary. And it shows faith in policing in the UK collapsing at around 2015. And I want to know why. 0345 6060973. I also want to know why people don't want to be police officers anymore. I can think of some answers to that, but I'd much rather hear your real ones rather than my speculations and theories. Do you know what, James? I did think about joining the police, but I didn't go through with it because ... or rather not ... but 0345 6060973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
James writes here, my son came home from college last week and said he wanted to be a police officer. My first thought was, I hope I can change his mind. Why? You don't tell me why. And that, I think, will be part of the question, part of the answer to the question of why faith in policing has gone off a cliff since about 2015. I'm going to read out one. I mean, it's not about me, but I do sometimes feel the need to set the record straight. So this one's a bit odd. Let me read it. Where are we? I love your Brexit views, James. I mean, frankly, who wouldn't? They're not views anymore, are they? They're facts. But you are part of the media who consistently berate the police. We statistically have the joint best with Japan incidents of police shootings in the world. Yet listening to you, you would imagine the police intentionally set out to kill young black men. It's just not true. I mean, that couldn't be further from the truth. I don't know whether you've been listening to the programme or getting your information from elsewhere. There was the lad, was it last week or the week before, where we had someone who never listens to the programme by his own admission, but has developed a deep and abiding hatred of me. You sort of find yourself thinking, well, where the hell does that come from? And I found something on social media in the aftermath of the Chris Cabba verdict, which I welcomed for the record. And it was Fraser reporting live from court on Chris Cabba's criminal past, on the things that he'd been associated with in the past, which I'd known about all morning because it was under reporting restrictions and we knew they were going to be lifted. So I'd known all morning. And a couple of the kind of usual racists on social media have got the footage of me listening to it and written long pieces about how you could tell from how grumpy I looked that I was gutted to discover that Chris Cabba had a long and complicated criminal past, with which there were two problems. One, a little unflattering, I grant you. So problem number one was I wasn't hearing it for the first time. You were. Problem number two was I'd already said that if you'd actually listened to the programme as opposed to just edited your own clip. Problem number three is that is what my face looks like. That was the only bit that possibly had a slight veneer of plausibility or authenticity to it, that is what you can watch me on any clip, on any subject. Unless I'm actively laughing, I look like a slapped backside. Adrian Charles wrote a wonderful piece about this in The Guardian a couple of weeks ago. It's the resting, that women have a word for it. I don't know what the male equivalent is. I have a resting, miserable git face. Even on occasion, a resting, angry face. I can be singing inside. I can be dancing through the metaphorical buttercups inside. And on the outside, it looks as if I'm contemplating a terrible diagnosis from the GP. So that I don't know where you get the idea. I think the police are institutionally racist in the cases where they have been found to be institutionally racist. I think the experience of black people at the hands of the police is profoundly different from mine. But I am actually a supporter of the police, particularly when they come under attack from opportunistic and deeply dishonest politicians. So give your head a wobble and give me a break, honestly. 21 after 12 is the time. Why has this faith in policing plummeted so violently? And why don't people want to join anymore? I think the questions might be linked. Of course, they might not. Darren's in Maidenhead. Darren, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on the show.
You're very welcome.
So I'm a serving police officer. I won't say which force, but it's in a very well-known city.
Sure.
I've been in about 3.5 years, so not overly long in terms of careers go. And I joined in really kind of amongst the incident with the tragic case of Sarah Everard.
Oh, yes.
And it was very much in the sort of the...
That hits a lot of people, particularly women, for obvious reasons. And the travesty of policing the vigil afterwards, that hits a lot of people very, very hard.
Yeah. So I joined pretty much when that was kind of going on. In terms of trust, there's topics within topics within topics as to why that might be going down. There is a I think there was some statistic or something. I think it was in about the mid-80s where trust was actually at its highest. There was some statistic, but I don't know how that was formulated or anything like that. But it's always
you should just go out and ask lots of people, and then plot your graph accordingly.
But it's always struck me that was when it was at its highest, when debatably that was when there was a lot more, for want of a better word, funny business going on amongst the...
we didn't know about it, I suppose.
Perhaps, no, and I think in terms of trust, there is what methodology are you using when you're asking the public? What is it? Trust in, will that police officer attack me? Will they, I'm going to lay it out on the cards here. Will they try and sexually assault me, kidnap me? Or will they solve my burglary? And that's a big question that it's a very expansive thing of, do you trust the police? Because trust is...
Well, you don't get multiple choice. It's a fairly straightforward question, exactly. So we don't need to overcomplicate it. Do you trust the police? No. Do you trust the police?
Yeah.
Yes. Or, in this case, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you trust the police? And if you're in the Netherlands, you're over 7. If you're in the UK, you're under 6.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it is probably down to the level of service we're able to provide to what's called volume crime. So volume crime is your day-to-day crimes, such as your burglaries, thefts, stuff like
the stuff
like
that you can't, or I mean, we would say won't, you would say can't really take any further for reasons, and that we feel instinctively that you should be doing more.
So there's a lot of, especially when it comes down to burglaries, we have specific evidential checklists that we need to sort of get, and that is the CCTV, any forensics, stuff like that, things like fingerprints. Before I joined, I thought any surface that you touched would leave a fingerprint. But when we call up our scene of crime officers, they have a budget, which is pitiful. Unfortunately, sometimes it's not in the public interest. That's what that word is used a lot. Public interest, i.e. it's not worth the money to send it off to the lab.
I mean, I don't know how much of this is new, how much of this would have been different back in the day and therefore isn't necessarily explained by decline.
Not, James.
What made you want to join?
So it's different. So my granddad was in the police.
Same here.
I wouldn't say he was a...
Can we pause for a minute? I don't know if I've said that. Same here. My granddad was in the police as well. I'm just mentioning that for our friend over here who thinks I'm a gangster, but my granddad was in the... Anyway, carry on.
Yeah. He wasn't... obviously, I love my granddad, but he wasn't the reason that I joined.
Sure.
I'd always had a natural instinct to join one of the emergency services. I'd always sort of wanted to... I haven't really got long enough to explain, but I wanted to be out there and actually...
Fair enough. And is it living up to your hopes and expectations?
So, yes and no. There's a reason. So we had... I went to a burglary the other night, and we caught the guy red-handed with a crowbar in his thing, and we got him, and the victim was super happy. That was a really big morale boost. However, I'm a response officer, so I respond to 999 calls and less serious calls. And we are constantly instructed to sit in hospital, with people, unfortunately, who are, for whatever reason, going through mental health crisis, something like that. I've been on whole shifts where I'm just sat there and we have to be on constant watches for people who have threatened suicide in police cells, and we have to watch them sleep most of the time. If you're a new officer and your expectation is you're going to be running around, chasing after, going on, blues and twos and everything, it's wildly different.
That's that is not. I mean, I don't know whether the two questions are going to have answers that can marry each other. That does not explain really why faith in the police would diminish, but it does explain why, as you say, the attractions of the job may diminish according to the more that you know about it. Yes and no, though. You take that as a win, and it sounds like you're in it for the long haul, for which we should all be grateful. And I say all because, if you're a victim of a serious crime, then unless you're very, very unlucky in life, you're going to have nobody else to turn to but the police. And by unlucky, I mean you wouldn't even want to turn to the police. So at this point here, faith in policing, James, has plummeted due to the rise in conspiracy theorists who choose to demonise the police and the government as part of their efforts to wreck institutions to increase their own authority. There could be something in that. 27 after 12 is the time, but looking at the dateline on this graph, the mystery remains. Why would it start plummeting in 2015? Pete's in Norwich. Pete, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning. I'm a police officer and I have been for 15 years. I joined in 2009, and I will only speak from my perspective and the conversations I've had with colleagues and friends.
Yes,
but
of course.
I think there was a definite generational shift, like in 2010 sort of time moving onwards, around public expectation of what the police can help with, as well as the pressures put on the policing by central government. So an example I'll give is we go to a number of calls in relation to harassment or public order offences around people saying abusive things online, that kind of thing. But a lot of the jobs we go to are civil disputes where someone's made a comment in a Facebook group, like a private community group, where they say, "Oh, don't use this person's business because they do a really bad job."
Yeah.
And because they're a sole proprietor, they take that as a personal attack, but that's not actually a police matter. That's a civil matter. But when we talk to people about that, they look like we're not doing anything because we don't want to.
Crikey, you'd think you'd have. Is that a bona fide complaint from the customer, or is it someone who's got a problem with the plumber pretending to be a bona fide complainer?
No, it's a genuine complaint. One of my officers spent 2 hours with that lady the other day discussing it, and it was a genuine concern, and it is a concern.
But why do you have to? What changed? Do you know what changed, Lee? Because I'm pretty sure. I mean, crikey, I could have my own police force if I was going to send people around every time someone said something mean about me online. So what's the threshold there for sending somebody round?
So the threshold is, a lot of the time, colleagues of mine who work in the control room who take the phone calls, a lot of the time it is that whether certain phrases are used or certain comments are made, they trigger a response from the police. And not all of the people that call in use those to their advantage, but there are definitely a small proportion of people that do.
So professional time wasters almost. They're just trying to cause trouble.
Potentially, yeah. There's certainly a very minor number of those out there, and I'd stress that's a really low number of people out there.
I know you have to be a bit diplomatic, but don't speak in code, because I'm a bit confused. Because we also, actually, another answer to the question would be the Daily Telegraph running 3 front pages claiming that one of their columnists was being investigated for a non-crime hate incident when she was told on tape that she was being investigated for a hate crime incident. So that doesn't help engender faith in the police.
No, not at all.
But when did this start? Because I'm sure when I was a kid, if someone put on... Well, there wasn't really an internet when I was a kid, but if someone stuck in a shop window, well, I don't know, some graffiti almost that just said, Keith is a rubbish radio person, then that wouldn't merit a police visit, would it?
No, and I think...
when did it start happening?
I think it started happening when the social media boom
Okay, so what crime are they investigating? What crime are they investigating when they do that then?
And that's the thing, they're not. And that's the problem is, and I think part of the issue is the public not understanding that, the police powers are very specific. We only have powers to investigate crimes. We only have powers to investigate certain things, such as court injunctions, molestation orders, and we can assist partner agencies with our legal powers for them to do their role. But a lot of people, and I think it's because of misinformation on social media, I think it's also about the fact that we are far more now. I mean, in the last 5 years, it's gone crazy with how careful we have to be when we speak as a society.
Yes. Well, I don't find personally. I find it, as someone who speaks for a living, three hours a day, 5 days a week. I find it really easy, but I understand lots of people don't. So I take your point with a pinch of salt.
I will say from my personal experience, I'm quite an outspoken person. People that know me, and if any of my friends hear me on the radio, they'll be laughing now because I'm quite an outspoken person. I have my thoughts, but I never let them interfere with how I treat people. But I'm entitled to my opinions. I'm entitled to my expressions. The difficulty is at work, that's not the case. Because if I say something even slightly wrong, completely innocently, I could lose my job. And a lot of officers nowadays are terrified of losing their job.
It's all gone a bit Gregg Wallace.
And that kind of stuff. Yeah. So, but I do think to kind of say when did the confidence dip off, it was around...
Because what you have to realise is that if you say something at work that someone else finds offensive, even if you think it's just banter, then you're contributing to the dip in trust in the police.
Yeah. I mean, not even just banter, just not knowing what you're saying is offensive.
But that's adding because everyone else manages.
Yeah.
So that adds to the loss of faith.
I mean, the loss of faith is people not realising.
Yeah, but some people listening to this now will see you as part of the problem, not the solution. They'll think, flipping out another copper who doesn't know what basic good manners looks like. That's why I'm losing. That's why I'm losing faith in police, because of people who come on the radio and claim you can't say what you want in this country anymore without getting into trouble. 99.999% of people manage. So why do we spend so much time talking about the 0.001%? When I said it's all gone a bit Gregg Wallace, you were supposed to go, no. You weren't supposed to go, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't hear you say that.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right then. That's all right then.
Yeah, I'll backtrack that. I'll retract that one.
Good. And thank you for what you do. 33 minutes after 12 is the time. So where is it coming from? I actually don't know. I didn't say that the fellow who described watching people sleep wasn't a reason for loss of trust in the police. But John in Edinburgh points out that reduces the service levels. So because they're watching people sleep and doing jobs that would once have been done by mental health services, then the response you will get from that force, from that service, is going to be compromised, inevitably, as a consequence of officers doing things that they probably shouldn't be doing and, as our caller told us, would rather not be. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:36 is the time. So don't feel that you need to have skin in the game to answer this question, because we all have skin. Well, you don't need to have obvious skin in the game, because we all have skin in the game. I mention it often. I probably mention it more often than almost any other caller. But when during lockdown a female police officer told us everybody loves the police until they're the ones being policed, really resonated with me. Because when I talk about being supportive of the police, you need to be confident that situation would sustain even if you found yourself the recipient of the police just doing their job. We have to look into this. And we felt during lockdown that a lot of people who'd been rather ignorant but incredibly pungently opinionated on the issues, for example, of stop and search, when they found themselves potentially subject to police attention despite being wholly innocent, perhaps they'd change their attitude to how wholly innocent young black men should be treated by the police. Turns out they didn't. Also turns out furlough didn't make everyone a lot more sympathetic towards the notion of the welfare state either. But hey-ho, we live in hope. So what, from the outside, even if you've never been anywhere near the police, either as a member of the service or as a victim or a perpetrator of crime, that would be a good hour. If you're a serial criminal, give me a ring and tell me why you think that faith in the police has plummeted. The story we did last week with Matt Shea was fascinating, wasn't it? The shoplifting story, about we wondered about this live on the programme when we were doing shoplifting conversations. So some of the reasons why faith in the police has dipped will not be the police's fault. Possibly most of them won't be. The idea that, shoplifting on an industrial scale to the point where, as Matt discovered, if you missed Wednesday's show, or indeed the dispatches that he's done on it, then Google is your friend. Warehouses in this country full of specifically stolen goods. I noticed, having done that interview with him, that there was some store security on my Lemsip at the week. So that must be one of the things that was being particularly targeted, would be the cold and flu medicines. So if you're seeing people come out of Marks and Spencer's and nobody's stopping them, even though they've got a basket full of stolen Percy pigs, maybe that translates into a growing lack of faith in the police. So the police becomes, if you like, a synonym for law and order. How much faith do you have in law? So what do you think explains 2015 in particular as the drop-off point. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. There's still time. It's only 20 to 1. Steve's in Lincoln. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Steve.
I think what struck me from your earlier statement was really, and the question, was really the date.
Yes,
when things started plummeting. And this was surely about the height of austerity, when police numbers plummeted by 20,000 across the country.
Well, cuts.
Yes.
That was when Theresa May stood up at the Police Federation and said, with a straight face, that reducing the number of police officers would in no way reduce their ability to police or to solve crimes. That was extraordinary,
Absolutely.
wasn't it?
Yeah, and what basically wiped police off the landscape in town centres and off the patrol in the streets.
Are we sure about that? Are you what experience are you drawing on? Are you a burglar making your way around Lincoln?
Fortunately, I've not had that much involvement with the police over my lifetime.
So you're a very good burglar then.
Yeah. And to the other point that you made about why are women's placed in the police? I mean, you just got to look at the statistic of 3% of rape cases get to go to trial. And
this is what I mean by the word police being a synonym for law and order, in a way, because that's not the fault of any individual police officers or even of a police service or a police force. It's going to be a combination of factors, of which they may be one, but the CPS is involved in that, the judicial system is involved, all sorts of factors in play. But if you're a woman who's been a victim of a horrible crime and the perpetrator either gets away with it or doesn't get prosecuted at all, then you're going to have the police in your sights.
But the narrative we've had probably since the Me Too movement kicked off was that police officers are not very sympathetic. They more investigate the victims of the crime as much as the perpetrators of the crime, and that sort of narrative just doesn't help in trust across the board of the police force as a whole. No,
I mean it's excellent points, and sort of. Also reminding us that it's a broad question that will have lots of answers, and yet I'm committed to this search for some skeleton keys, some Rosetta Stones, and that 2015. Austerity was kicking in before that, but I think Steve's right. I think that's when it really began to pinch. I'm pretty sure it was, and she became Prime Minister not long afterwards, but I think Theresa May in front of the Police Federation would be 2014, 2015, and there was that fella who'd won Community Police Officer of the Year, as in the police officer in that community, not a PCSO, but the Community Police Officer of the Year, who addressed her directly from the stage and described what would happen if people like that were removed from duty, removed from service, because it was the invisible policing that he would do, the connections that he'd have with the community, the knowledge that he'd have that the son of the house at number 44 had got in with a bad lot, and the ability to pop round and see him and to know what was going on in the community. And the Tories thought you could cut that without having any consequences. And of course, he turned out to have been on the neighbouring patch to the person that went on to be the Manchester Arena bomber, and the inevitable question then becomes, if there'd been good community policing in place then, would he have been nipped in the bud? Would he have been spotted earlier? We'll never know, but it's a point that's been made by more qualified people than me. Thank you, Steve. Eloise is in Nottingham. Eloise, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm
welcome.
A little bit nervous.
It's only me.
Because I know, well, I've spoken to you before, so it's not about you. It's more about the topic of the call is still a little bit raw for me.
Go on. Oh, I'm sorry.
So it was a couple of months ago, my partner brought to my attention that she thought she'd seen a body of a homeless person. So we went to go and check and obviously make the appropriate steps to inform somebody. Unfortunately, while we were checking, we had a random member of the public exposing themselves to us, so we ended up running away. But on the second occasion that we thought we saw this body, we flagged down a police car immediately to make them aware. And initially, their response was very aggressive towards us, very standoffish. They wanted our information. They almost seemed like we'd done something wrong. And then later that evening, after making the report, I had a withheld number phone call where the police contacted me and said, yes, we've found the body. Why didn't you report it earlier? And I hadn't thought to tell them at the time the details about the unfortunate circumstances of the man exposing himself.
So the body was in the same place. Sorry, I got a bit confused. You went back.
Sorry, yeah.
Because I was going to say, who's been moving this dead body around the place? So you went back to the site, and so you ran away the first time because someone exposed themselves to you, and then you made your way back and reported it then.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. And I mean, overall, luckily, it was a sleeping bag just stuffed with items.
Oh.
However, we thought we were doing the right thing by reporting this. When the police called me back, they said, yes, we found the body. Why didn't you tell us sooner?
Right.
So I was mortified. I was crying. And I said, no, this can't be right. What's happened? And they said, look, it's a joke. We haven't found a body, but we wanted to teach you a lesson to show you why you should have reported this to us sooner. And then they hung up on me, and that was it. And we were so mortified, me and my partner were so shaken, that we just had to leave town. We had to go home. And since then, I've really had quite a lot of trauma towards the police, because I then felt I couldn't go.
There's a lot going on here. I find that unbelievable.
I mean, I was shocked. I thought it was a prank call at first, but obviously it was, unfortunately, legitimate. And my friends were saying, go and report it. I said, well, how can I go and report it? I thought I've done something right in reporting the initial thing. Now I've not got to go to the police again and report something internally. Surely they're going to look out for their own, and I'll just be instantly dismissed.
Mm.
So,
they deny it, have no record of it. What would you? I don't know what to say, really. I mean, I suppose that, and you had quite a lot of faith in the police before this incident?
Well, unfortunately not. Again, due to various experiences, I've seen, disparity in terms of how the police treat people of different races. I've seen that firsthand amongst myself and my partner. I've had problems with stalkers in the past. And again, just like your previous caller, Steve said, it does, as a victim, I would never want to have that victim mentality myself. But when you go to the police, you do very much feel under the spotlight.
I nearly picked him up on that. But I didn't, because he sounded like such a sensible chap. And clearly, I was right not to. This idea that you go to the police as a victim of crime or as a reporter of crime, and you come away from that encounter feeling bruised rather than appreciated or understood or thanked. What a bizarre story, Eloise. I'm sorry for your trouble. I don't know quite what was going on there. It sounds as if you might have been the victim of some sort of weak prank from within a police station. But as you say, if the number's withheld, there's nothing you can do about it. Or indeed, prove that it was indeed an officer that did it. Thank you. I quite like this, not to make light of serious stuff, but I remember this as well. Everything started going wrong when David Bowie died in January of 2016. That's a theory I could roll with. That's when the kind of, it felt like someone turned the lights off or someone started turning the dial down. When David Bowie passed away, I was watching Ricky Gervais talk about David Bowie on one of the chat shows. I think it might have been an American chat show, and it was the only time I've ever seen Ricky Gervais not trying to be funny. He's one of those people, isn't he? He just can't help himself. He just will always be trying to be funny. So you're almost waiting for the gag. And he's talking about a late meeting, one of David Bowie's final ever performances that Ricky Gervais was involved in without knowing that it was destined to be David Bowie's final ever performance, I think, some sort of benefit that he flew out to America for. It's an incredible story, and bits of it were funny. He talks about how he went to a BBC thing when he was first famous, and Alan Yentop, who was running the BBC, came over and said, would you like to meet David Bowie? And he said, yeah, of course I would. So he's leading him to the dressing room to meet. These are two different stories, to meet David Bowie. And as they're making their way down the corridor, Alan Yentop turns around, or Greg Dyke, I forget who it was, one of them, Greg Dyke probably, turns around and goes, oi, Salman, we're going to see David. So Ricky Gervais has only been famous for about 10 minutes, is on his way to see his hero, David Bowie, arm in arm with Salman Rushdie. And he said he went to the pub the next night, and his mate said to him, did you do much last night? And he said, no. Because you can't, how are you even going to start that story, especially if it's a world that you've only recently arrived in? But that's not, but obviously when he was not trying to be funny, he was just talking about meeting the man, and it just reminded me what an absolute magician David Bowie was. But I don't think we can blame the loss of faith in the police on his premature passing. It's 12:48.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I have a theory. I haven't shared it with you yet, but I remember watching the Farage riots and thinking, well, what do you expect when you see the police coming under attack, when members of the media and the political class are constantly attacking the police for wearing multicoloured helmets, or for dancing at the Notting Hill Carnival, or for doing stuff that doesn't involve telling people to get your trousers on, you're nicked, but does involve either prevention of crime or building up better community cohesion. The whipping boy status of the police for a certain type of right-wing blowhard, whether in the media or in politics, must be a contributing factor to this. And in fact, it's a story in the Times today that reminded me of that, reporting that Notting Hill Carnival is torture for police officers. Almost all fear for their safety there, is the report from a survey by the Metropolitan Police Federation, which describes in detail various officers having a horrible time, including the famous ones who are pictured apparently dancing at Carnival. One of them says, "People, unwanted individuals gyrating against me without consent. I'm expected to smile it off." Nobody wants to be gyrated against without consent. But, in the great scheme of things, it gets reported in the newspapers as police officers not taking their job very seriously. So simultaneously, the Federation tells us they don't feel safe there, and the Daily Mail tells us that they're having far too good a time and should be busy doing other things. Again, I remember speaking to a female police officer who'd been in a position of authority at Carnival, and she says, do they honestly think that we don't know how to use radios? So if you're dancing 1 minute and you get a message through saying, we've got some trouble at the corner of Ladbroke Grove, can you get there now? They're not just going to run towards the corner of Ladbroke Grove now, regardless of what they were doing 10 seconds previously, whether they were doing a conga, doing the limbo, having a sip of coconut milk, or just standing there with a face like a slap backside, i.e. mine. Chris is in Bromley. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Long-time listener and a proud owner of the Mystery Hour board game, so thanks very much for that.
Top man. The phone line's gone a bit funny since you came on, so hopefully that will be rectified. We'll roll the dice, Chris.
Sure. My thought on this is social media and video phones are, I think, probably somewhere in the remit of part of the problem, not obviously the whole issue.
Go on.
But I often get videos that people have taken of the police doing a bad job.
Yes.
And once you've watched one, and I'd watched one, and now I can't...
Oh, I did worry. We'll try and get him back, actually, because that's probably a really important point, isn't it, that we've overlooked thus far. 12:54 is the time. Paul's in Fulham. Paul, what would you like to say?
Hello. I have a story that my wife was involved in. My wife fired a member of team from her company, and he was not happy about it, obviously, and instead of going through correct channels and so on, he involved some of his friends to sexually harass and threaten her.
Right, I'm sorry.
When she involved the police, the Metropolitan Police in that,
yes.
3 days later, 2 females from Metropolitan Police arrived at her office and laughed it off as a funny joke where she was so stressed and she was too afraid to go home, in fact.
Why do you think that was? Because they didn't find that sort of offence serious, or because they were just a bit rubbish? Or, I mean, how do you make sense of it, you and your wife together?
I had to pick her up from work in the middle of the night because she was literally afraid to go home at a regular time. I think the police didn't take it seriously enough because they didn't have enough training with that, maybe, or enough funding to arrive on the day when somebody arrived in the office and threatened her physically.
And that happened before they came round?
Yeah, absolutely.
And they still didn't take it seriously?
No. She had text messages. She had vile phone calls.
There it is. 1,000, 100,000, 10,000, 2,000 experiences akin to this, and you have You do have data. You do have a plural. Thank you, Paul. I'm sorry, but I mean, these are not nice stories to hear, including if you're a police officer. Rob, however, is cross about police wearing rainbow flags. Politicising the police should never happen. Wearing rainbow flags and crap like that turns a lot of people off, James. Just to edit your message slightly, it turns a lot of homophobes off, Rob. So within living memory, you could be arrested for being gay by police officers. So if they've made a decision to try and send a message to that section of the community that we are friendly towards you now, it's probably quite a good use of a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of resource and energy. But yeah, as you say, it turns a lot of bigots off. You spelt bigots wrong. Chris is, well, I've not got long, Chris. I've got 90 seconds. Make it sing. Back to the social media stuff. What effect does it have on you personally?
Well, I find that a number of videos that come out are always of police doing a bad job.
Never get one. Never get a clip of them playing a blinder, will you? Or very, very rarely.
No one watches them doing their great job that they always do. But it's always perceived as a bad job because you get no context. The video only starts when someone's being aggravated.
It's like my face.
And the birth of the video phone and social media has made this more and more widespread.
And with the times.
All you get is just a bombardment of poor policing, but it's actually just a perception of poor policing rather than actual poor policing.
I remember when the EDL lot started sticking phones in everybody's face when they were trying to get viral clips out of it, and it's not a pleasant experience, albeit that
it's not.
It's, you know, but you're right. You know, if you're a police officer, then it's happening to you all the time. And
I think people are going out there specifically to try and create these videos.
You're not going to go viral from getting footage of someone going, "A very good afternoon to you, sir. Are you going about your lawful business in a satisfying fashion this afternoon?" You are. But equally, I mean, even with context being corrupted, you don't necessarily get to broadcast smoke when there hasn't been any fire. But yeah, and it changes the bond of trust. It changes the contract between the police. As people, you are waiting for them to do something wrong, which is why you've got a camera in their face, as opposed to people to whom you turn in times of trouble and who you can trust. Thank you, Chris. And that's it for another day. We will be doing it all again tomorrow morning from 10. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a dizzying array of podcasts. So download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.